Hey my dear listener, before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Comment down where are you from and what's your time right now. Let's jump into the video. Story 1. Born into smoke and linen. The first breath of a Victorian life. You arrive without ceremony. No soft lighting, no quiet room. Birth in Victorian Britain is an event managed at home, surrounded by furniture that has been pushed aside, curtains drawn tight against the street, and sheets boiled earlier that day in a copper pot. Whether you are born into wealth or into a single rented room, the body's demands are the same. Blood, breath, pain, waiting. Someone counts the hours. Someone worries about infection, even if they do not yet have a word for it. If you are born in a city, perhaps in London, the air you inhale carries soot from coal fires and the faint, sour smell of waste. Chimneys are everywhere. The smoke settles into fabric, into hair, into lungs. If you are born in the countryside, the air is cleaner, but isolation brings its own risks. Distance from help can be as dangerous as filth. In both places, childbirth remains uncertain. Many mothers do not survive it. Many infants do not survive their first days. Survival is not assumed, it is watched for. You are wrapped quickly, tightly, in layers of linen. Swaddling is still common early in the century, believed to straighten limbs and calm the body. The cloth is reused, washed, mended, and reused again. It smells faintly of soap and smoke. The midwife, almost always a woman with practical knowledge rather than formal training, watches your color. Pink is good. Blue is not. Crying is welcomed, even celebrated, because it means air has reached the lungs. Your name may already be chosen, or it may wait until your survival seems more certain. Baptism is often scheduled quickly, not only for spiritual reasons, but because death comes so easily. If you are weak or premature, a minister might be called to the house. Water, a few words, a mark in a parish register. You become real in ink before you become strong in flesh. Class makes itself known almost immediately, but not in the way people imagine. Wealth does not guarantee safety. In richer households, doctors are sometimes summoned men trained in theory, less so in hygiene. Instruments are reused. Hands are not always washed. In poorer homes, the midwife's experience may be the only protection. Either way, the risks are high. Fever after childbirth, what later generations will call infection, kills without drama. It is swift, often misunderstood, and accepted with a quiet dread. If you are born to a working family, your mother likely returns to labor soon. Rest is a luxury few can afford. Laundry, mending, food preparation, or paid work resumes within days or weeks. If you are born into comfort, your mother may be confined longer, but even then the expectation is endurance. Pain is not considered remarkable. It is simply part of the process. Feeding becomes the next concern. Breastfeeding is common among the poor and sometimes avoided among the wealthy, where wet nurses or early forms of artificial feeding may be used. These substitutes are risky. Milk spoils easily. Water is often contaminated. Bottles are difficult to clean. Many infants die not from dramatic illness, but from slow dehydration or infection brought on by what they are fed. You are weighed rarely, if at all. Growth is judged by eye and habit. If you cry often, you are said to be strong-willed. If you are quiet, you are considered good. There is little room for the idea that a child's behavior might reflect discomfort or illness. Survival strategies are practical, not sentimental. Your world at first is small. A cradle near the hearth, a shared bed, the sound of footsteps overhead if you live in rented rooms, the noise of carts and vendors outside. Privacy does not exist in the modern sense. Neither does silence. You learn to sleep through noise, through conversation, through coughing. Many adults around you cough constantly. It is not yet considered alarming. Records are kept, but sparingly. Your birth is noted, your baptism is noted. If you die, that will be noted too. These entries are brief. Name, date, parentage, sometimes cause of death, often vague. Weakness, convulsions, teething. Words that explain little and end discussion quickly. Government interest in your survival is minimal. Statistics are gathered inconsistently. Reformers argue about infant mortality, but solutions are slow. Responsibility rests with families, churches, and chants. The idea that the state might intervene to ensure a child's health is still forming, still debated, still resisted. If you are lucky, you pass your first year. This alone sets you apart from many who share your birth year. Your body grows accustomed to its environment. Your immune system adapts to bacteria that will remain dangerous but survivable. Teething brings fever and fear. Many believe it causes death. Remedies are applied, rubbing gums with spirits, tying charms, offering opiates in tiny doses. Relief is sought wherever it can be found. By the time you begin to walk, you are already shaped by routine. You are carried less, set down more. You learn where not to crawl, which objects bring reprimand, which bring laughter. Discipline begins early, not out of cruelty but necessity. Adults are busy. Space is limited. A child who understands boundaries is safer. Your clothing is practical. Dresses for both boys and girls in early years. Layers that can be let out as you grow. Shoes are stiff, often uncomfortable. Bare feet are common indoors. Cleanliness is relative. Bathing is infrequent by modern standards, but washing of face and hands happens when water and time allow. Around you, life continues with little pause for your presence. Work schedules, church attendance, market days. You are fitted into an existing structure rather than the structure bending around you. This is not considered neglect. It is simply how life is arranged. Above all, your early years are defined by uncertainty. Not emotional uncertainty, but physical. Every cough is watched. Every fever is noted. Survival is not celebrated loudly because it tempts fate. Instead, it is acknowledged quietly, with relief and a return to routine. And so you live, at least for now, another small body navigating a world not designed for gentleness, shaped by smoke, fabric, and habit. But as your second year approaches, expectations begin to change. How soon will you be useful? How early will discipline turn into labor? And at what point does childhood, as Victorians understand it, truly end? If you have survived infancy, the adults around you begin to relax, but only slightly. Survival does not mean indulgence. It means preparation. By the time you can walk steadily, you are expected to adapt to the rhythms of the household. The Victorian home, whether a single rented room or a many-room terrace, runs on schedules that do not slow for children. You are expected to learn them quickly. Your day begins early. Light determines much of life. Gas lighting exists in wealthier areas, but it is expensive and uneven. Most families still rely on daylight and firelight. You wake when others wake. You sleep when others sleep. Naps are irregular and often discouraged once you are past toddlerhood. A child who sleeps too much is thought to be lazy or unwell. Meals are plain and repetitive. Bread forms the backbone of your diet. If you are poor, it is often coarse, dark, and filling rather than pleasant. If you are better off, it is white and softer, though still eaten in large quantities. Milk is consumed cautiously. Many families dilute it, not always out of deceit, but because it spoils quickly. Butter, when available, is used sparingly. Meat is a treat, not a staple, for most households. You eat what the household eats. There is little concept of children's food beyond infancy. If your teeth can manage it, you are expected to do the same. Hunger is common, but it is not framed as a problem unless it becomes extreme. Appetite is considered a sign of health and future usefulness. Clothing becomes more restrictive as you grow. Stays, stiff collars, layered skirts, or trousers held up by braces. Comfort is rarely the goal. Clothes signal respectability. Even poor families try to keep children presentable, because appearance affects how you are treated by employers, teachers, and neighbors. A clean child reflects a disciplined household. Play exists, but it is unstructured and unsupervised. You play in streets, yards, alleys, or fields depending on where you live. Toys are few and often handmade. Sticks, hoops, scraps of fabric, bits of string. Games are learned from other children, not taught by adults. Injuries are common and usually untreated unless severe. Scrapes and bruises are part of growing. If you live in an industrial city, perhaps Manchester, the streets are crowded with carts, animals, and people. You learn quickly where to stand and where not to. Accidents happen often. Newspapers regularly report children injured or killed by wagons or machinery. These stories are read with sadness, but rarely with outrage. Risk is understood as unavoidable. Education, if it comes at all, comes unevenly. Before compulsory schooling, learning depends on family income, local charities, and reform movements. Sunday schools are common. They teach basic reading using the Bible. Writing is less emphasized. Arithmetic, if taught, is practical counting, measuring, keeping simple accounts. For many families, education is weighed against income. A child who attends school is a child not earning. Even small contributions matter. Running errands, minding younger siblings, assisting in workshops or fields. Childhood is not a protected stage. It is a training period. Discipline is firm and physical by modern standards. Corporal punishment is widely accepted. It is not necessarily cruel in intent, but it is frequent. Obedience is valued above curiosity. A quiet child is praised. A questioning one is corrected. Authority flows downward and is rarely challenged. Health remains fragile. Childhood illnesses circulate constantly: measles, scarlet fever, whooping cough. Outbreaks move through neighborhoods quickly. Quarantine is inconsistent. Some families isolate the sick, others cannot afford to. You may share a bed with siblings even while ill. Survival often depends on the strength you have already built. Medical care is limited. Doctors are consulted for severe cases, but many rely on home remedies. Mustard plasters, poultices, herbal teas. Opium-based medicines are common and legal, used to quiet pain and coughing. Dosages are imprecise. Relief sometimes comes at a cost not yet understood. As you grow, your body begins to show signs of future labor. Hands toughen. Posture adapts to work. Even children who attend school part-time often work before or after lessons. Time is divided not by age but by usefulness. You become aware of class differences early. You notice which children have shoes without holes, which carry books, which disappear during the day to work indoors rather than outdoors. These differences are observed quietly. Envy exists, but so does resignation. The idea that life might be otherwise is not widely encouraged. Religion continues to shape routine. Church attendance is expected. Sermons emphasize duty, patience, and moral behavior. Heaven is presented as a reward for endurance rather than happiness. This framing fits neatly with daily life. You are taught that suffering has purpose, even if that purpose is not immediately visible. By the time you approach your 7th or 8th year, expectations sharpen. You are no longer simply surviving, you are preparing. Conversations around you shift subtly. Adults discuss placements, apprenticeships, factory work, service. Your future is not imagined in abstract terms but in practical ones. What can you do? How soon can you begin? Your childhood, as Victorians understand it, is already narrowing. The space for aimless growth shrinks as responsibilities loom closer. Yet there is still a pause, a brief moment before full usefulness is demanded. A moment where learning, watching, and waiting fill your days. And in that moment, standing on the edge between being cared for and being required, one question hangs quietly in the air. How early is too early to ask a child to carry the weight of adult life? The moment when you are no longer considered a child does not arrive with ceremony. There is no single birthday that marks the change. Instead, it happens gradually, through expectation rather than announcement. One day you are told to stay home and watch a sibling. Another day you are sent out with a message, then with goods, then with responsibility. By the time you realize something has shifted, it already has. For many Victorian children, this transition happens between the ages of 8 and 12. The exact timing depends on health, size, and circumstance. A sturdy child may be put to work earlier. A smaller or weaker one may be kept back not out of kindness, but because productivity matters. You are assessed not by potential but by immediate capacity. If your family has connections, you may be apprenticed. This is considered a good outcome. An apprenticeship promises training, structure, and eventual skill. In practice, it often means long hours, obedience to a master, and little pay. You live where you work or spend most of your waking hours there. Discipline is strict. Mistakes are punished. But there is at least a sense of progression, learning a trade that might support you later. If no such opportunity exists, you work where work is available. Factories, workshops, fields, homes of others. Tasks are repetitive and physically demanding. Children are valued for their size. You can fit where adults cannot under machines, between rows, into corners. This is described as suitability rather than danger. Your days lengthen. 10 or 12-hour shifts are not unusual. Breaks are short. Meals are eaten quickly and without ceremony. Fatigue becomes normal. You learn to measure time not by clocks but by physical markers. When your legs begin to ache, when your eyes struggle to focus, when the light changes. Education, if it continues at all, becomes secondary. Evening schools exist in some places, but attendance is irregular. Reading and writing remain basic for many. This limits future options, but that connection is rarely made explicit. Survival takes precedence over planning. Health suffers quietly. Growth is often stunted. Injuries accumulate. A strained back, a damaged joint, lungs irritated by dust or smoke. These are not considered exceptional outcomes. They are expected costs. Complaints are discouraged. A child who cannot work is a burden, and everyone knows it. Yet even within this narrowing life, moments of attachment and identity form. You develop friendships with other children who share your hours and exhaustion. You develop pride in small competencies, tying a knot quickly, carrying more than expected, finishing a task without correction. These markers matter. They signal belonging in an adult world that rarely offers praise. Family relationships shift. Parents become supervisors rather than protectors. Siblings become coworkers. Affection exists, but it is expressed through practicality. A saved piece of food, a shared blanket, a word of advice before work. Love is woven into endurance. By your early teens, you are largely invisible as a child. You are counted as part of the workforce, part of the household economy, part of the routine. Official records may still list you as a minor, but daily life does not reflect this distinction. You are expected to manage fatigue, risk, and responsibility with little guidance. This early adulthood shapes everything that follows. Bodies worn early age faster. Options narrow sooner. Habits formed under pressure become permanent. Even those who later rise in status often carry these early patterns with them: frugality, caution, a sense that rest must be earned rather than assumed. Looking back, reformers will later argue that childhood was stolen, that labor came too soon. But at the time, most participants do not frame it this way. Life is not compared to an alternative. It is accepted as given. The question is not whether it should be different, but whether it is survivable. And for many, survival is the only measurable success. This first stage of a Victorian life, birth through early usefulness, sets the tone for everything that follows. It teaches that the body is a tool, that time is never truly your own, and that endurance is the most reliable virtue. These lessons will echo through work, marriage, illness, and old age. As you move forward into adolescence and fuller participation in adult society, you carry these early assumptions with you. They shape what you expect from life and what life, in turn, demands from you. And this raises a quiet, lingering question that Victorians themselves rarely pause to ask. When survival becomes the central achievement of childhood, what room is left for anything else, and how might that shape an entire society for generations to come? Story 2. Milk, bread, and thin gruel. Childhood diets and daily hunger. Hunger in Victorian Britain is rarely dramatic. It does not always arrive as starvation or collapse. More often, it settles in quietly and stays. You learn it early not as pain but as absence. A feeling that something is missing, that meals end too soon, that fullness is temporary and unreliable. Hunger becomes part of the background of life, as familiar as coal smoke or the sound of boots on stone. From the moment you are weaned, food becomes a calculation, not of nutrition but of cost, availability, and endurance. Families eat what they can afford, not what is best. The idea of a balanced diet exists only in fragments, scattered among medical pamphlets and reformers' speeches. For most people, eating is about getting through the day. Bread is the anchor of your diet. It appears at nearly every meal, sometimes alone. It fills the stomach quickly and keeps hunger at bay, at least for a while. For working families, bread is often bought in large loaves, sliced thin to make it last. Stale bread is not wasted. It is soaked, toasted, or turned into puddings. Crumbs are saved. Nothing edible is thrown away. The quality of bread varies sharply by class. White bread made from finely milled flour is a mark of respectability and means. Brown or coarse bread is cheaper and more common among the poor. It is heavier, denser, and sometimes adulterated with fillers, chalk, alum, or other substances added to improve appearance or stretch supply. These practices are known but tolerated. Regulation is weak, and hunger discourages complaint. Milk in theory is a staple for children. In practice, it is unreliable. Fresh milk spoils quickly and is easily contaminated. In cities like London, cows are often kept in unsanitary conditions close to where the milk is sold. Water is sometimes added to increase volume, further reducing nutritional value. Boiling milk helps, but fuel costs money. Many families serve it cold and diluted, hopping for the best. Butter and cheese appear when they can. Butter is expensive and used sparingly, often reserved for adults doing heavy labor. Cheese is more filling and keeps longer but still not guaranteed. Dripping fat collected from cooked meat is prized. It is spread on bread, mixed into porridge, or saved carefully in jars. Fat means energy, and energy means endurance. Meat occupies a strange place in the Victorian imagination. It is considered strengthening and morally important, yet it is out of reach for many. Working families might eat meat once or twice a week, if that. Cuts are cheap and tough. Offal liver, kidneys, tripe is common, affordable, and filling. These parts are not glamorous, but they are sustaining. Children eat what adults eat in smaller portions. There is little accommodation for growth or appetite. If food runs short, children often receive less, not more. This is not always framed as sacrifice. It is seen as practical. Adults must work to secure future meals. Children are expected to endure. Meals follow routine rather than preference. Breakfast may be bread and tea weak, sweetened if sugar is available. Sugar itself becomes more common as the century progresses, offering cheap calories and brief comfort. Lunch, if eaten at all, is simple and portable. Dinner is the main meal taken after work, often late. By then, exhaustion dulls both appetite and pleasure. Cooking is constrained by space and fuel. In crowded housing, families may share a single hearth or oven. Pots are few. Recipes are simple because complexity requires time, ingredients, and control over heat. Stews and boiled dishes dominate. They stretch ingredients and forgive imprecision. For children, hunger affects more than the stomach. It shapes attention, mood, and growth. Teachers complain of lethargy. Employers notice slowness. Parents worry quietly, but options are limited. Charity exists, but it is conditional and often humiliating. Accepting help can mark a family as failing. Public concern about hunger rises and falls. Reports circulate. Reformers publish pamphlets. Committees investigate. Yet solutions remain partial. The prevailing belief is that poverty is a moral condition as much as an economic one. Feeding the hungry too generously is feared to encourage dependence. In institutions, food is used deliberately as discipline. In schools, orphanages, and especially workhouses governed by the poor law, meals are monotonous by design. Gruel becomes symbolic. Thin, bland, and served in measured portions. It is meant to sustain life without comfort. Hunger is part of the lesson. Children in these settings learn quickly not to expect satisfaction. They eat slowly to make meals last. They trade scraps when possible. They dream of foods they have heard about but rarely tasted. Oranges, meat pies, fresh cakes. These foods become symbols of a life elsewhere. Seasonal hunger is common even for families who usually manage. Winter brings higher fuel costs and fewer fresh foods. Illness increases appetite just as income falls. Children feel this acutely. Growth slows. Clothes hang looser. Adults notice but may not comment, fearing what acknowledgement implies. Yet hunger also produces resilience. Children learn to tolerate discomfort, to work despite emptiness, to measure hunger as a condition rather than a crisis. This endurance is often praised. A child who complains is seen as weak. A child who adapts is admired. As you move through these early years, food teaches you expectations. You learn that satisfaction is temporary, that desire must be controlled, that fullness is not guaranteed. These lessons extend beyond the table. They shape how you approach work, rest, and even hope. And as reformers begin to ask whether children can truly learn or grow under such conditions, another question lingers beneath their debates. If hunger is ordinary and endurance is praised, how does a society recognize when deprivation has gone too far? As childhood gives way to regular work, hunger changes character. It no longer feels temporary or situational. It becomes scheduled. You know when it will arrive and how long it will last. You learn to pace yourself around it, to anticipate the hours when your stomach will be empty and your body still expected to perform. For working children, meals are organized around labor, not growth. Breakfast is often taken early and hurriedly. Tea, weak, dark, and heavily diluted, fills the cup. Bread fills the hand. There is little time to sit. Food is swallowed quickly, not tasted. The goal is to begin the day without dizziness. Midday meals depend on circumstance. If you work close to home, you may return briefly to eat. More often, you carry something with you, a piece of bread, perhaps spread thinly with dripping or jam if the household can spare it. In factories, breaks are short and tightly regulated. Food is eaten standing or sitting on floors, surrounded by noise and dust. Hunger is muted by exhaustion. Dinner remains the central meal, but its substance is unpredictable. Stews stretch ingredients, but only so far. Potatoes become increasingly important as the century progresses, cheap, filling, and versatile. They are boiled, mashed, or added to soups. Vegetables appear when in season, often overcooked and plain. Fresh fruit is rare for the poor, associated with markets and indulgence rather than necessity. For adolescents, appetite increases just as portions often do not. Growth spurts bring discomfort that is poorly understood. A growing body requires more energy, but households calculate food by cost, not biology. Boys doing heavy labor may be favored slightly over girls, though this varies by family. Girls' hunger is more often expected to be restrained, quietly managed. In institutional settings, food is deliberately standardized. In workhouses under the poor law system, meals are regulated down to ounces and pints. The goal is consistency, not adequacy. Food must be sufficient to sustain life but not attractive enough to encourage reliance. Gruel, bread, and occasionally cheese or meat appear in rotation. Complaints are punished. Hunger is framed as a moral test. Children in these environments develop strategies. They eat slowly. They save crumbs. They trade favors for scraps. Some steal when desperation outweighs fear. Punishment follows, reinforcing the lesson that hunger is both expected and controlled. Medical opinion on diet begins to shift during this period, but change is slow. Some doctors argue that children require meat and milk to grow properly. Others warn against indulgence. The science of nutrition is emerging, but it has little influence on policy. Food remains an economic issue first, a health issue second. Urban reformers conduct surveys and publish reports. They describe stunted growth, fatigue, and illness among working children. These accounts circulate among the middle classes, provoking concern and debate. Yet solutions are cautious. School meals are discussed but resisted. Charity is preferred to systemic change, and charity is conditional. At home, mothers manage hunger as best they can. They dilute soups, stretch stews, skip meals themselves. This labor is invisible and constant. Planning meals becomes an exercise in arithmetic and restraint. Waste is unforgivable. Appetite is managed through habit rather than satisfaction. Hunger also shapes social behavior. Invitations are rare because feeding guests is costly. Celebrations are modest. Holidays may include slightly better food, but expectations are kept low to avoid disappointment. Children learn not to ask for treats they know are unlikely to appear. Over time, hunger becomes internalized. You stop noticing it as an urgent sensation and start experiencing it as a baseline condition. Fullness feels strange, even uncomfortable. This affects how you relate to food later in life. Those who escape poverty often remain cautious eaters, wary of waste and excess. As adolescence continues, hunger competes with other pressures: long hours, physical strain, and the beginnings of adult responsibility. Food remains central but not as pleasure. It is fuel, rationed carefully and consumed without ceremony. Reform slowly advances. Compulsory education, laws begin to limit child labor, indirectly affecting hunger by changing schedules and expectations. School meals are debated as a solution to poor attendance and performance. Progress is uneven and contested. By the time you approach adulthood, your relationship with food is already fixed. You know what hunger feels like and how to endure it. You know which foods satisfy briefly and which sustain longer. You know that appetite must often be ignored. And this raises a quiet but persistent question: if an entire generation grows up learning to treat hunger as normal, how does that shape their health, their patience, and their expectations of what life is meant to provide? By the time you reach adulthood, hunger no longer announces itself loudly. It has become familiar, folded into routine, anticipated rather than feared. You know how long you can go without eating before your hands begin to shake, before your thoughts slow, before irritation sets in. These thresholds are learned through repetition, not instruction. For many Victorians, adulthood does not bring abundance. It brings predictability. Wages may increase slightly, but so do responsibilities. If you marry, food must now stretch further. If children arrive, your own hunger becomes secondary again, just as it once did for your parents. The cycle repeats quietly, efficiently. Diet improves modestly for some as the century progresses. Industrial food production increases availability. Railways move goods faster. Tinned foods appear, though they are often mistrusted or too expensive for daily use. Bread becomes more regulated after scandals over adulteration. These changes matter, but they arrive unevenly and slowly. In growing industrial centers like Birmingham, access to food improves alongside employment, yet inequality persists. Markets are fuller, but wages still dictate choices. Better food exists, visible and close, but not always reachable. This proximity sharpens awareness without necessarily easing hunger. Medical reformers begin to connect diet to long-term health more clearly. Reports link childhood hunger to adult illness: weak bones, poor teeth, chronic fatigue. These findings circulate, influencing debates about schooling, labor, and public responsibility. Still, action lags behind knowledge. Feeding people adequately remains politically fraught. For those who spent childhood in institutions, the legacy of controlled diets lingers. Food retains an emotional charge. Some eat quickly, fearing scarcity. Others hoard without intention. Meals are approached cautiously, even when supply is stable. Hunger leaves habits that do not disappear with improved circumstances. Memory plays a role. Adults recall specific foods with unusual clarity: the rare sweetness of jam, the heaviness of suet pudding, the warmth of broth on a cold evening. These memories stand out because they were exceptions. Ordinary meals blur together, but moments of fullness remain distinct. Public policy eventually begins to shift. By the late Victorian period, school meals and nutritional standards are discussed more seriously. The idea that hunger undermines national strength gains traction, especially in the context of military readiness and industrial productivity. Children's bodies are reframed not only as private concerns, but as public assets. Yet for those who lived through earlier decades, these changes arrive too late to alter their own foundations. Their bodies and expectations are already shaped. Hunger has taught them restraint, caution, and endurance. These qualities are often praised as virtues, even as their cost becomes clearer. Looking back, it becomes difficult to separate resilience from deprivation. The ability to endure hunger is admired, but it is born from necessity, not choice. A society that normalizes hunger must also normalize its consequences: shorter lives, quieter ambitions, limited horizons. Food in this context is never just nourishment. It is structure, discipline, and signal. It marks class boundaries, reinforces routine, and teaches lessons about worth and patience. The Victorian table, sparse though it often is, becomes one of the primary classrooms of life. As you move forward into the next stages: education, labor, reputation, the habits learned around food continue to guide behavior. You plan carefully. You waste little. You expect scarcity even when it does not immediately appear. And this leaves one final question lingering at the edge of the plate. If hunger was once an ordinary teacher, quietly shaping generations, what lessons did it leave behind that still echo in how modern societies think about work, worth, and who deserves to be well fed? Story 3. Learning to be useful: schoolrooms, factories, and early labor. Usefulness in Victorian life is not a compliment. It is a requirement. By the time you reach an age where your hands can grip and your legs can carry you reliably, the question is no longer whether you will work, but where and under whom. Childhood, as an extended period of protected learning, exists mostly as an idea discussed by reformers rather than a reality lived by most families. If you are lucky, your introduction to usefulness begins in a schoolroom. These rooms vary widely. Some are attached to churches, others to charitable societies, others still run privately for a fee. The space is often cramped. Benches are hard and closely packed. Light comes from tall windows when available, though soot and grime dim even these. Heat is inconsistent. In winter, children huddle in coats. In summer, air grows stale and heavy. Instruction is rigid and repetitive. Reading is taught through memorization. Writing is practiced on slates to save paper. Arithmetic focuses on sums that mirror daily life. Wages measures time. Silence is enforced. Obedience is valued above comprehension. A well-run classroom is quiet, orderly, and emotionally restrained. Attendance is irregular. Families withdraw children when work becomes available or necessary. Teachers expect this and plan accordingly. Lessons repeat constantly, accommodating a rotating population. Progress is slow but measurable. The goal is not intellectual development but basic competence. For many children, schooling is part-time at best. Mornings might be spent in class, afternoons in workshops or on the street selling goods. Fatigue is common. Attention drifts. Punishment follows. Corporal discipline remains standard, justified as necessary for maintaining order among large numbers of children. Beyond the schoolroom, usefulness becomes physical. Factories absorb children because they can pay them less and fit them into smaller spaces. In textile mills, children tend machines, tie broken threads, and clean beneath moving parts. The work is monotonous and dangerous. Injuries are frequent. Fingers are lost. Hair is caught. These incidents are recorded briefly, if at all. In industrial centers like Leeds, factory labor reshapes childhood entirely. Shifts begin early and end late. Bells signal movement. Time is no longer flexible. You learn to measure your day by the rhythm of machines rather than the sun. Fatigue becomes a constant companion. Other children enter domestic service. This path is common for girls, though boys also serve as errand runners or general help. Service promises shelter and food, but little freedom. Hours are long. Privacy is minimal. Authority is personal and absolute. A child in service learns to anticipate needs, to remain unobtrusive, to accept correction without protest. Apprenticeships sit somewhere between education and labor. They are governed by contracts that bind a child to a master for years. In theory, the master provides training, food, and moral guidance. In practice, quality varies widely. Some apprentices learn valuable skills. Others perform menial tasks with little instruction. Leaving early is difficult and often illegal. Work in agriculture follows seasonal rhythms. Children plant, weed, harvest, and tend animals. Hours stretch during peak seasons. Pay is low, sometimes given in kind rather than cash. The work is physically demanding but familiar, often done alongside family. This proximity softens the experience but does not reduce the labor. Across all these settings, one lesson is consistent: time belongs to others. Bells, supervisors, masters, and employers dictate movement. Idleness is suspect. Rest must be justified. A child who finishes a task early is given another. Reformers increasingly criticize this system. Reports are written, testimonies are gathered, parliamentary inquiries debate limits on child labor. Laws are passed gradually, restricting hours and conditions. Enforcement, however, is uneven. Inspectors are few. Employers resist. Families depend on income. Children themselves rarely articulate complaint in ways that reach authority. They adapt. They learn to work through discomfort, to endure boredom, to accept hierarchy. These adaptations are praised as character building. Industry and obedience are framed as moral goods. Yet the cost accumulates quietly. Bodies develop under strain. Education remains fragmented. Curiosity narrows. The idea that life might include choice or leisure remains distant. Usefulness becomes identity. As you move deeper into this system, usefulness begins to define your worth not only to employers, but to family and society. Praise comes when you contribute. Concern arises only when you cannot. Childhood fades not with loss of innocence, but with absorption into routine. And as laws slowly begin to ask how much work is too much, another question lingers beneath the reforms. If usefulness is learned so early and so thoroughly, what happens when the body eventually can no longer meet the demands it was trained to accept? As usefulness becomes routine rather than novelty, the world narrows around it. Days blur into one another, distinguished only by minor variations in task or fatigue. The body adjusts first. Muscles strengthen in specific ways, joints adapt to repeated motion, and pain settles into predictable places. What once felt difficult becomes normal, not because it is easy, but because it is constant. Schooling, if it continues at all, now competes directly with labor. Compulsory education laws begin to appear in the latter half of the century, but their reach is uneven. Attendance is required in theory, negotiated in practice. Employers may release children for part of the day, or families may falsify ages and records. Learning happens in fragments, fitted around work rather than replacing it. In classrooms, teachers struggle with exhaustion they did not cause. Children arrive late, fall asleep at desks, forget lessons learned the week before. Instruction becomes more mechanical. Copying, recitation, repetition. There is little time to explore or explain. The goal is compliance and minimal literacy, not curiosity. Factories remain the dominant training ground for usefulness. Here, time discipline is absolute. Bells ring, shifts begin. Late arrival is punished. Children learn to move quickly, to anticipate commands, to keep pace with machines that do not tire. Noise is constant. Conversation is limited. The body learns to work almost independently of thought. Safety is discussed but rarely prioritized. Guards on machines are inconsistent. Lighting is poor. Dust fills the air. Accidents are common enough to be unremarkable. A lost finger, a crushed hand, a broken limb, these are reported briefly, then absorbed into routine. Compensation, if it exists, is minimal. Reform efforts gather momentum during this period. Parliamentary debates lead to the gradual introduction of regulations like the Factory Acts, which limit hours and mandate inspections. On paper, conditions improve. In reality, enforcement depends on local will and resources. Inspectors are few. Factories are many. Compliance varies. Employers adapt. Shifts are rearranged. Ages are misreported. Work is reclassified. Children continue to labor, though sometimes under different names or schedules. Families, dependent on income, rarely protest. Reform that threatens survival is viewed with suspicion, even when it promises protection. Domestic service offers a different rhythm but similar demands. Children in service rise before their employers and retire after them. Tasks are varied but unending: cleaning, carrying, waiting. The work is less visibly dangerous but psychologically demanding. Mistakes are noticed. Praise is rare. Privacy is almost non-existent. Apprenticeships, when well managed, provide structure and eventual mobility. When poorly managed, they trap children in years of drudgery with little instruction. Contracts bind tightly. Leaving early risks legal consequences. Some apprentices run away. Others endure, counting years until release. In rural areas, agricultural labor continues to absorb children seasonally. School attendance drops during planting and harvest. Work is physically exhausting but socially familiar. Children labor alongside relatives and neighbors. This familiarity softens authority but not effort. Long days in fields leave little energy for study. Across all environments, usefulness reshapes identity. Children learn to measure themselves by output rather than age or potential. Praise comes when tasks are completed efficiently. Shame follows slowness or error. Self-worth becomes conditional. Leisure is scarce and often brief. Sunday offers partial respite, structured around church rather than rest. Games are tolerated but monitored. Idleness is discouraged. Even play is expected to be orderly, improving, or at least unobtrusive. Health deteriorates quietly. Chronic fatigue becomes common. Growth slows. Minor illnesses linger. Access to medical care remains limited. Absence from work due to sickness is risky. A child who cannot work may be replaced. Despite this, many children internalize pride in endurance. They compare themselves to peers, noting who can last longer, lift more, endure pain without complaint. These comparisons matter. They establish status in a world where other forms of recognition are scarce. Reformers continue to argue that education should replace labor, that childhood should be extended. These ideas circulate in pamphlets and speeches, influencing public opinion gradually. Yet for those living within the system, such arguments feel distant. Daily needs override long-term ideals. As adolescence approaches, usefulness becomes expectation rather than experiment. You are no longer being trained, you are being relied upon. Your absence would be noticed. Your contribution is counted. The transition is complete. And yet beneath the routine, attention grows. Laws suggest limits. Reformers suggest alternatives. The idea that work might wait, that learning might come first, begins to take shape. This raises a question that Victorian society struggles to answer. If usefulness defines worth, how does one measure the value of those still learning or those already worn by early labor? By the time adolescence is fully underway, usefulness has settled into permanence. What began as training has become expectation. You are no longer asked whether you can work. You are asked why you would not. The distinction between learning and labor has largely collapsed. Work is now the primary teacher. Your body reflects this shift. Strength develops unevenly, shaped by repetitive tasks rather than balanced growth. One arm may be stronger than the other. One shoulder sits lower. Feet ache constantly. These changes are noticed but rarely addressed. They are interpreted as signs of effort, not warning signals. Education, if still present, feels increasingly symbolic. Evening classes promise improvement but demand energy few possess. Reading becomes functional, used for instructions, notices, and scripture. Writing is limited to names, figures, and brief notes. Ambition narrows accordingly. You plan for continuity, not advancement. Employers now treat you as reliable labor. Wages increase slightly, enough to justify greater demands. Absence is less tolerated. Mistakes carry heavier consequences. Responsibility arrives without ceremony, accompanied by risk. If something goes wrong, fault travels downward. For those in factories, machinery continues to dictate pace. The early fear has faded, replaced by familiarity. This familiarity is dangerous. Accidents often occur not from ignorance, but from fatigue and routine. A moment's inattention is enough. When injuries happen, recovery is uncertain. Compensation is minimal. A damaged body may mean permanent loss of income. In service, expectations intensify. Adolescents are entrusted with more complex tasks and stricter oversight. Reputation becomes critical. A single accusation of carelessness, insolence, or dishonesty can end a position. References matter. Mobility depends on how others describe your usefulness. Apprentices near the end of their terms count time carefully. Each year passed is a step closer to autonomy. Yet freedom is not guaranteed. Some masters delay release. Others provide inadequate certification. Skill levels vary. Independence, when it arrives, is fragile. Reform continues to reshape the landscape slowly. Debates in Parliament produce additional regulations. Hours are limited further. Inspection improves marginally. Public awareness grows. Newspapers publish accounts of overworked children and injured youths. Sympathy increases, but enforcement remains inconsistent. For those already shaped by early labor, reforms arrive late. Their benefits are felt more by younger cohorts. This creates a quiet divide between generations: those who endured without protection and those who receive partial relief. Resentment is rare, but comparison is inevitable. Psychologically, early labor leaves its mark. Many adolescents struggle to imagine alternatives. Work feels inevitable. Leisure feels undeserved. Idleness produces guilt. Even rest is measured against productivity. These internal rules persist into adulthood, long after external oversight fades. Family dynamics adjust accordingly. Adolescents contribute significantly to household income. Their opinions carry slightly more weight, but authority remains hierarchical. Dependence and responsibility coexist uneasily. You are relied upon, yet still controlled. As adolescence ends, usefulness no longer needs reinforcement. It is ingrained. You have learned to obey schedules, suppress complaint, and value endurance. These traits are praised publicly and rewarded selectively. They form the backbone of industrial society. Looking back, reformers will argue that childhood was shortened, that potential was sacrificed for productivity. Yet from within the experience, life feels continuous rather than stolen. One stage flows into the next without pause. And so, as you step fully into adult life, you carry with you the lessons of early labor about time, value, and worth. These lessons will shape how you approach marriage, health, and aging. Which leaves a final question lingering at the threshold of adulthood. If usefulness is learned before choice is possible, how freely can a life ever be lived afterward? Story 4. Coming of age in crowded streets. Adolescence without privacy. Adolescence in the Victorian world does not arrive with space. It arrives in compression. Bodies grow, voices change, Thoughts become more complicated, but the rooms do not expand to accommodate them. Privacy, as a concept, remains largely theoretical. You live among others, within earshot and eyesight, learning yourself in fragments while being constantly observed. If you grow up in a city like London, the crowd is your constant companion. Streets are narrow and busy. Homes are subdivided into rooms, then into corners. Entire families may sleep in a single space. Lodgers are common, taken in to offset rent. Walls are thin. Conversations carry. Nothing you do is entirely unseen or unheard. In this environment, adolescence becomes public by default. Physical changes are noticed and commented upon. There is little effort to shield young people from embarrassment. Modesty is expected, but instruction is vague. You are told what not to do more often than what is happening to you. Information comes indirectly through overheard remarks, older siblings, or observation. Gender shapes experience sharply. For girls, adolescence brings increased scrutiny. Movement is monitored more closely. Reputation becomes fragile. A girl's behavior reflects not only on herself, but on her family. Time spent outside the home is questioned. Friendships are evaluated. Clothing is adjusted to signal modesty, even as the body underneath changes in ways that draw attention. For boys, expectations shift toward independence and toughness. Emotional restraint is emphasized. Physical changes are acknowledged but not discussed. Strength and endurance are valued. Vulnerability is discouraged. Crowded living conditions offer little refuge from comparison. You are constantly measured against others' size, stamina, confidence. Sleeping arrangements reflect necessity rather than comfort. You may share a bed with siblings well into adolescence. In some cases, children of different ages and even genders sleep in the same room. Curtains or screens, if present, offer minimal separation. Personal thoughts have nowhere to retreat. Bathing is infrequent and communal when it happens. Privacy during washing is limited. Embarrassment is managed through routine and avoidance rather than accommodation. The body is treated as functional, not personal. Awareness of self develops in spite of circumstances, not because of care. Outside the home, streets offer a different kind of exposure. Adolescents spend time outdoors because there is nowhere else to go. Streets function as social spaces, places to talk, watch, and be watched. This visibility brings opportunity and risk. Friendships form easily. Conflicts do too. Adults intervene selectively, often only when disruption becomes obvious. Workplaces offer little privacy as well. Factories, workshops, and service positions place adolescents under constant supervision. Mistakes are public. Corrections are delivered aloud. Shame is a tool. You learn quickly how to minimize attention, how to blend into routine, how to appear competent even when uncertain. Romantic curiosity emerges, but expression is constrained. Courtship, when permitted, is regulated and often supervised. Informal interactions occur nonetheless, glances exchanged, brief conversations stolen in doorways or during errands. These moments are fleeting and charged precisely because they are rare. Moral instruction intensifies during adolescence. Sermons warn against temptation. Pamphlets caution against vice. The dangers of drink, sexuality, and idleness are emphasized. These messages are delivered broadly, without much distinction between guidance and threat. Fear becomes a substitute for understanding. Urban density amplifies anxiety about morality. Reformers worry about overcrowding leading to corruption. Reports describe shared sleeping spaces and lack of supervision as risks to virtue. These concerns focus particularly on young people, whose bodies and behaviors are seen as unstable and impressionable. In cities like Liverpool, where migration and trade bring constant movement, anonymity increases even as privacy does not. You are surrounded by strangers, yet never alone. This paradox shapes adolescence profoundly. Identity forms amid noise, interruption, and watchfulness. Despite constraints, adolescents carve out small spaces of autonomy. a habitual route home, a preferred corner of a room, a trusted friend. These fragments matter. They offer moments of selfhood in an environment that rarely acknowledges individual interior life. Conflict with authority increases during this period. Adolescents test boundaries, not always deliberately. Fatigue, frustration, and curiosity combine. Punishment follows predictably. Discipline is meant to correct behavior, not explore cause. Emotional complexity is largely unrecognized. By late adolescence, expectations solidify. You are expected to behave as an adult, though you may still be treated as a child. Responsibility increases faster than independence. Privacy remains limited. Reputation matters more than comfort. Looking back, it becomes clear that Victorian adolescence is shaped less by inner turmoil than by external constraint. Growth happens in public. Mistakes are visible. Self-understanding develops without solitude. And this raises a quiet, persistent question as adolescence progresses. When a person is never truly alone, never truly unobserved, how do they learn who they are separate from who they are expected to be? As adolescence continues, the crowdedness of life begins to shape not just your body, but your mind and social instincts. Observation is constant. You learn to navigate public scrutiny while maintaining a fragile sense of self. Every word, gesture, and glance can be noticed, judged, and remembered. Mistakes are rarely private. Victories are often unnoticed. This creates a kind of internal discipline, an almost unconscious calibration of behavior to expectation. In shared homes, conflict is inevitable. Siblings quarrel over space, possessions, and attention. Parents enforce rules inconsistently, often prioritizing survival over fairness. Rooms are cluttered, noise is continuous, and furniture is improvised. Privacy is not merely absent, it is impossible. Your body, your thoughts, your growing awareness of the world exist alongside others, pressed into public life by proximity. In streets and alleys, you begin to negotiate your own boundaries. Friends become allies in crowded spaces, teaching you how to slip between authority and peer observation. You learn who can be trusted, who is cautious, who gossips. This informal education is as crucial as any classroom or workplace. It teaches survival in a social environment dense with watchers, regulators, and competitors. Work, now often a central part of life, enforces visibility even more. In factories and workshops, you are measured constantly by output. Efficiency is public. Mistakes invite immediate correction, sometimes in front of peers. At the same time, small successes, quick threading, careful cleaning, remembering instructions earn recognition and slightly more freedom. Performance is a constant negotiation between pressure and reward. Romantic and sexual awareness emerges in this crowded environment, though it is constrained by both proximity and supervision. Encounters are furtive, brief, and fraught with potential exposure. Gossip spreads rapidly, making discretion essential. You begin to understand the power of reputation, both for protection and survival. A whispered rumor can affect employment opportunities, friendships, or parental trust. Adolescence becomes a lesson in social navigation as much as bodily change. Authority is omnipresent. Teachers, employers, and parents enforce rules, often with physical punishment. Mistakes are corrected immediately. Obedience is not optional. Even in free time, the crowdedness of urban life means other adults, older children, and neighbors are observing. Space to experiment without consequence is almost non-existent. Yet within these constraints, moments of autonomy emerge. A habitual route to a market, a secret exchange with a friend, an overlooked corner of a room. These are private islands in a public sea. They are small, ephemeral, and intensely meaningful. They allow self-reflection, social strategy, and the faint development of independent identity. Health and hygiene continue to pose challenges. Shared beds, infrequent bathing, and dense housing increase exposure to illness. Epidemics, scarlet fever, smallpox, tuberculosis spread quickly. You learn early to recognize symptoms, avoid contagion when possible, and endure sickness with minimal attention. The crowded environment teaches vigilance through necessity, not theory. Food remains communal and regimented. Meals must be negotiated in shared spaces, often with limited portions. Adolescents are expected to eat quickly, leave room for others, and avoid waste. Social pressure reinforces moderation and restraint. Desire is private, appetite is public. As adolescence nears its close, expectations shift from learning usefulness to demonstrating reliability. Employers and parents begin to judge maturity not by age, but by behavior in shared spaces. You are assessed by how well you manage visibility, maintain reputation, and endure oversight. Privacy is no longer simply absent, it is a skill to be navigated. By this stage, the lessons of crowded streets have fused with those of early labor. You have learned discretion, endurance, negotiation, and awareness. These skills are rarely formalized but shape adulthood profoundly. Success in life depends as much on navigating others as on individual talent. And yet, even with these skills, a question lingers. When life is defined by observation, when growth occurs in public and mistakes are visible to all, what remains truly your own, and how does one ever feel fully independent in a world that constantly watches? By the end of adolescence, you have internalized the lessons of a life lived in public. Crowded streets, shared rooms, and constant supervision have taught you to anticipate observation, to measure your actions, and to endure scrutiny without complaint. These skills, learned out of necessity, become inseparable from identity. Independence is measured not in solitude, but in the ability to navigate visibility. In urban homes, privacy remains limited, but control over small corners increases. You may claim a stool near the window, a shelf for personal belongings, or a habitual route to the market. These small claims are not granted. They are negotiated subtly through timing, behavior, and endurance. They represent tiny victories in a life structured by others. Workplaces continue to define routine. Factories, workshops, and domestic service demand obedience, efficiency, and reliability. Mistakes are public. Successes are quietly noted. The skills acquired, attention to detail, rapid adaptation, careful self-monitoring become the foundation for adult employment. Adolescents are judged not by potential, but by consistency and endurance. Reliability in full view is the ultimate marker of worth. Social relationships take on increased complexity. Friendships deepen, but so does the awareness of scrutiny. Peer judgment is constant. Gossip, rumor, and comparison influence choices. Adolescents learn to navigate networks of observation, balancing honesty with discretion, trust with caution. Social intelligence becomes survival skill. Romantic awareness continues to develop under these constraints. Encounters are brief, regulated, and observed, requiring ingenuity and subtlety. Reputation matters. A misstep can ripple through family, work, and peer networks. Adolescents learn the power of discretion and the cost of exposure. Emotional development is inseparable from public performance. Education, when available, becomes less a site of learning than a test of endurance. You attend for the sake of compliance or reputation, rather than curiosity. Lessons are fragmented by work and fatigue. Literacy and numeracy are measured more by functional ability than deep understanding. Knowledge exists in service to survival and utility, rather than exploration. Health and hygiene continue to be affected by crowding. Disease spreads quickly. You learn to self-monitor and endure illness quietly. Recovery is incomplete at times, leaving lingering effects that shape adult stamina and resilience. Early exposure to adversity becomes a form of training for adult life. As you reach legal adulthood, or what society considers adulthood, crowding has shaped your moral, social, and physical self. Independence is less about freedom from oversight than about navigating visibility, negotiating social pressures, and surviving scrutiny. Identity is public, learned in the crucible of observation, exposure, and constraint. Reflecting on these years, it becomes clear that the crowded environment of adolescence teaches endurance, vigilance, and adaptability. But it also raises questions about personal autonomy. When life is constantly observed, when mistakes cannot remain private, when growth occurs in public, can anyone truly claim a private self? And if independence is learned through visibility rather than solitude, what does it mean to be free? These are the legacies of growing up in crowded streets. Resilience shaped by observation, identity sculpted by necessity, and a persistent awareness that oneself is never entirely private. For Victorians, adolescence is less a time of exploration and more a rehearsal for survival, endurance, and the careful negotiation of life under the watchful eyes of family, employers, and society. Story 5. Courts, Contracts, and the Making of Adulthood Apprenticeships and Early Work. By the mid-teens, survival and usefulness alone are no longer enough. Society begins to formalize the transition to adulthood through systems that promise structure, skill, and social order. Apprenticeships, early employment contracts, and legal arrangements. These mechanisms create a bridge between childhood and adult responsibility, but they also bind young people tightly to obligations, often before they are fully prepared to navigate autonomy. Apprenticeships are among the most common avenues for entry into adult life. Boys and girls alike may be bound to masters for years, learning trades ranging from tailoring to blacksmithing, from printing to domestic service. The contracts themselves are formal legal documents. Parents often negotiate terms, agreeing to surrender control of their child in exchange for training and sometimes room and board. In theory, these arrangements provide a clear path to skill and future independence. In practice, outcomes vary widely. A typical apprenticeship begins with the expectation of total obedience. The apprentice works long hours, often from sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week performing menial and repetitive tasks before advancing to more skilled work. Mistakes are corrected publicly. Physical punishment is common and considered a legitimate tool for shaping behavior. Rewards, when they come, are small and tied to demonstration of diligence, endurance, and reliability. Payment is minimal. Some apprentices receive a small stipend, but many work primarily for room, board, and the promise of future skill. If the master provides lodging, it is often crowded and uncomfortable. Privacy is rare. Mealtimes are communal, structured, and brief. Clothes and bedding are sparse, reflecting the prevailing view that comfort is secondary to usefulness. Apprenticeships also serve as social education. The young person learns hierarchy, authority, and protocol. A master is absolute within the workshop or household. Questions are discouraged. Observation and mimicry are rewarded. Patience, attention, and endurance become measurable traits. The apprentice's reputation depends on behavior as much as skill. Contracts formalize these expectations. Legal documents specify duration, often 7 years duties, and sometimes penalties for disobedience or early departure. Breaking an apprenticeship is difficult. Courts generally side with the master, and enforcement can include fines, imprisonment, or social censure. The child's consent is often secondary. Family necessity overrides personal preference. For girls, domestic service offers a parallel system. They may be apprenticed as housemaids, cooks, or laundresses. Tasks are diverse, from cleaning to cooking to managing household logistics. Authority is personal and intimate, coming from the mistress or master of the house. Mistakes are noted publicly, and correction is often both verbal and physical. Success is measured by discretion, reliability, and the ability to anticipate needs. Early labor is not limited to apprenticeships. Factories, docks, and workshops hire adolescents directly, especially those who have completed some training or proven reliability. Contracts formalize hours, wages, and responsibilities, creating obligations that carry legal weight. Young people become fully responsible for attendance and performance, accountable not only to family, but to society's systems. Health and safety remain tenuous. Apprentices and young workers are exposed to injury, illness, and exhaustion. Legal oversight is limited and enforcement sporadic. The physical demands of labor intersect with adolescence in ways that can permanently shape the body. Endurance is praised, vulnerability is punished. The young worker learns quickly that complaints must be strategic, not constant. Psychologically, apprenticeships and early labor foster discipline but also constraint. Freedom is conditional. Decisions are limited. Autonomy exists within narrow bounds. The apprentice may choose to improve efficiency, avoid punishment, or cultivate skill, but the overarching trajectory is imposed. Independence is promised in the distant future, contingent on compliance and survival. These early contracts also serve social and economic purposes. They channel youth into predictable roles. Families gain labor and reduce economic burden. Employers secure reliable workers trained in specific skills. Society maintains order by structuring the transition from childhood to adult responsibility. The system rewards endurance and obedience, even as it suppresses exploration and autonomy. At the same time, apprenticeship and early labor can spark opportunity. A successful apprentice may gain skills that ensure self-sufficiency, reputation, and income. A domestic servant who earns trust and experience may secure better employment or marriage prospects. But the margin between success and failure is narrow, and errors, physical, social, or behavioral, carry high costs. As you stand at the threshold of this system, one fact becomes clear. The making of adulthood is not a moment, but a prolonged negotiation. Each day, each task, each decision contributes to a larger contract between self, family, and society. You are bound by law, expectation, and necessity long before full maturity arrives. And yet, amid the structure, discipline, and obligation, a question lingers quietly, pressing against the edges of all contracts. If adulthood is conferred through obedience and endurance, what room remains for choice, and what happens to those who stumble before they reach it? As time passes, the rigid structures of apprenticeship and early work begin to assert themselves more fully. Days are measured not by sunlight or personal inclination, but by the rhythms of labor and oversight. Bells, instructions, and deadlines dictate activity. Every action is observed, evaluated, and often corrected, reinforcing the sense that your value depends entirely on usefulness and compliance. Apprentices begin to specialize within their trades. Early tasks, fetching, cleaning, and basic preparation give way to more skilled work, measuring, cutting, shaping, sewing, or managing basic accounts. Progress is conditional. Mistakes can set you back months. Mastery is defined by the master's approval rather than any abstract standard of competence. The apprentice learns to anticipate expectations as much as to perform skills. For girls in domestic service, responsibilities expand similarly. Tasks grow complex. Managing laundry, preparing meals, supervising younger servants, or attending to the household schedules. Mistakes are noted immediately, and reputations are fragile. Social navigation becomes as important as practical skill. A girl who can anticipate needs, maintain discretion, and endure criticism is far more likely to secure a favorable recommendation at the end of her term. Wages remain modest but start to reflect skill and reliability. Apprentices may receive small payments, usually a few shillings a week, alongside board and lodging. Early adult employment offers direct wages but still with significant constraints. The money you earn belongs largely to survival, food, rent, clothing. Little is left for leisure or accumulation. Independence exists, but it is precarious. The body continues to be tested. Long hours, repetitive tasks, and inadequate rest shape growth and stamina. Injuries are common, from minor cuts and burns to permanent damage from heavy machinery. Adolescents develop resilience out of necessity, but the costs are often lifelong. Endurance is both expected and rewarded, even as it comes at the expense of health. Education, if it persists, remains functional. Reading and writing are used to record accounts, copy instructions, or communicate with employers. Arithmetic becomes practical, calculating measures, wages, or resources. Beyond this, knowledge is subordinate to labor. Apprentices and young workers learn by doing, observation, and imitation rather than theory. Success is measured in skill, reliability, and survival, not intellectual curiosity. Social life is constrained but not absent. Friendships form in workplaces, streets, and shared living quarters. Adolescents learn alliances, negotiation, and trust. Reputation within peer networks matters. A clever or reliable apprentice is respected. A negligent one is marginalized. Observing and interpreting others, behavior becomes as critical as performing tasks oneself. Discipline remains central. Corporal punishment is applied when mistakes occur. Public reprimand serves as both correction and warning to others. Adolescents learn not only to follow rules but to anticipate consequences before missteps occur. Emotional regulation is trained through repetition rather than discussion. Mentorship, when present, is invaluable but rare. A perceptive master may offer guidance, advice, or protection from excessive punishment. These relationships can determine both skill development and future opportunity. Where mentorship is absent, adolescents rely on observation, trial and error, and peer instruction, increasing the risk of error and exploitation. Economic pressures intertwine with social norms. Families expect contributions. Masters expect obedience. Society expects productivity. Adolescents are caught in overlapping obligations, negotiating survival while learning the limits of authority and the value of skill. Success is rarely measured in comfort or satisfaction, but in continued endurance and eventual release from formal oversight. And yet within these constraints, opportunity remains possible. Skill mastery can unlock wages, mobility, or reputation. Apprentices who endure can emerge as journeymen, small business owners, or trusted servants. Domestic servants can secure positions in more prestigious households or gain marriage prospects, but the margin for error is small. Failure can have lasting consequences. Looking closely at this period, it becomes clear that adolescence is not merely a passage of years, but a carefully constructed system of socialization and labor. Every day, every task, and every observation teaches endurance, obedience, and the value of skill. But it also raises an unspoken question. When freedom is delayed, choices constrained, and mistakes costly, what does it mean to truly become an adult, and is adulthood merely a continuation of imposed responsibility, or something more? By the end of the apprenticeship or early labor period, adolescence has given way to a kind of practical adulthood. The formal bonds of contracts dissolve, either because the term expires, wages are secured, or skills are recognized as sufficient. Yet the imprint of these early obligations remains profound. You have been shaped not only by work itself, but by the continuous pressures of observation, expectation, and discipline. For apprentices, the final stages involve increasingly complex and independent tasks. You may supervise junior apprentices, manage sections of production, or perform intricate, skilled work that demonstrates mastery. Recognition comes slowly and unevenly, often dependent on the perception of the master rather than objective ability. Nevertheless, successful apprentices are rewarded with certificates, recommendations, or the ability to seek paid employment elsewhere. In domestic service, the end of formal apprenticeship or tenure is marked by references. A trusted servant may move to a better household, negotiate slightly higher wages, or gain autonomy in selecting future employment. Reputation, carefully managed throughout years of observation and correction, determines opportunities. Discretion, reliability, and skill become currency in a system that increasingly treats adults as rational agents but expects continuity in obedience. Wages, when earned independently, begin to reflect both skill and market demand. Yet independence is still limited. Rent, food, and obligations to family continue to constrain choice. Economic freedom is partial. Adolescents entering adulthood find themselves navigating a world where responsibility arrives first and opportunity slowly follows. The body, shaped by years of labor, bears lasting marks. Muscles and reflexes are trained, but fatigue is ingrained. Minor injuries may become chronic. Stamina is high, but vulnerability remains. Health continues to be mediated by work and economy rather than medicine. Adolescents who survive these formative years have endurance, but it comes at the cost of vulnerability. Social lessons persist beyond the workplace. The crowdedness of life, the constant observation, and the pressures of reputation have trained you to navigate relationships with care. Friendships, alliances, and romantic possibilities are informed by past experience. Discretion matters, timing matters, and exposure carries risk. Adolescents learn the subtle economy of trust, reputation, and perception. Psychologically, these years forge resilience, patience, and an internalized sense of duty. Yet they also carry shadows, a tendency towards self-discipline bordering on self-denial, an expectation that effort is never complete, and an ingrained fear of failure or public correction. Independence is learned as negotiation within structures rather than as freedom to choose. The lessons of apprenticeship extend into adult life, shaping behavior, priorities, and even morality. Society benefits from this system. Trained, disciplined, and reliable adults enter the labor market, fulfilling roles in industry, domestic service, and commerce. Families gain economically. Communities maintain order. Yet these benefits come at a cost: the suppression of curiosity, limited leisure, and delayed autonomy. Life outside labor is narrow, defined by survival and expectation rather than personal exploration. As the formal bonds of apprenticeship and contract dissolve, young adults are finally free to direct their own paths. Some seize the opportunities, using skill and reputation to secure independence, higher wages, or social mobility. Others struggle, constrained by habit, reputation, and the long shadow of earlier dependency. Even freedom carries the weight of learned endurance. And here lies the final reflection. Adulthood, in the Victorian sense, is not granted automatically with age, but earned through years of structured labor, obedience, and survival under scrutiny. Yet one wonders, when freedom is the culmination of imposed discipline rather than choice, how truly free can the adult be? How much of the self is constructed by necessity before it can ever be claimed as one's own? Story 6. Women at work balancing labor, household, and social expectation. For women in Victorian Britain, work is never only labor, it is a negotiation between obligation, survival, and social expectation. From childhood, girls are trained to contribute to household economies: sweeping, cooking, sewing, caring for younger siblings. These tasks are unpaid, but they are considered essential to family survival. They teach endurance, skill, and obedience, even before formal employment begins. As adolescence approaches, labor outside the home often becomes necessary. Families of limited means send daughters into domestic service, apprenticeships in dressmaking, or industrial work. Unlike male counterparts, women's labor is judged both for output and moral propriety. A girl who works diligently but is perceived as immodest may face social stigma. One who preserves her reputation but falters in duty is criticized for inefficiency. Every action is evaluated against overlapping standards of utility and virtue. Domestic service dominates urban female labor. Kitchens, laundries, and households of wealthier families absorb countless young women. Work begins before dawn and stretches late into the evening. Tasks are diverse: scrubbing floors, washing dishes, preparing meals, maintaining clothing, and attending to the whims of household members. Mistakes are corrected publicly, and praise is rare. The servant's presence is constant, her absence penalized. Discipline is rigid, and authority is personal, absolute, and unpredictable. Industrial work offers alternatives. Textile mills, garment factories, and printing workshops employ young women in concentrated, repetitive labor. Hours are long, often 10 to 12 per day, and conditions harsh: poor ventilation, long periods standing, and exposure to dust or chemicals. Pay is low, yet labor is essential. Skill may bring small increments in wages, but the fundamental expectation is endurance and obedience. Unlike men, women often face additional moral scrutiny, ensuring that labor and reputation are in balance. Education for working women is often limited or intermittent. Schools exist, but attendance is constrained by labor needs. Literacy and numeracy are taught primarily as functional skills, reading instructions, keeping accounts, or recording domestic inventories. Broader intellectual or vocational education is rare. Knowledge is instrumental, aimed at enhancing usefulness, not personal development. Marriage and household expectations intersect with labor. Young women are trained early to manage both domestic duties and economic realities. They are expected to contribute to family income while preparing for eventual marital responsibilities. The dual demand earning and domestic skill limits free time and shapes daily routine. Even leisure, when possible, is brief, structured, and socially supervised. Health and physical endurance are tested continually. Work is exhausting, food often limited, and privacy scarce. Shared living spaces magnify the pressures of adolescence and early adulthood. Women in domestic or industrial labor must navigate constant oversight, maintain social reputation, and preserve physical stamina simultaneously. Sickness is tolerated sparingly. Absence carries risk for both income and social standing. Social networks provide relief and instruction. Friends, fellow workers, and sometimes sympathetic employers offer guidance, companionship, and practical tips for survival. Within these networks, young women learn strategies for efficiency, discretion, and endurance. Shared knowledge compensates for the gaps left by formal education or inconsistent guidance from family or masters. Economic necessity often overrides personal choice. Decisions about employment, relocation, and even marriage are shaped by survival and social expectation. Opportunities for autonomy exist, but they are contingent on navigating family, employer, and societal pressures simultaneously. Success is measured in stability, reputation, and endurance rather than independence or fulfillment. Even mundane daily rhythms are deeply instructive. Rising with the household, managing multiple tasks, responding promptly to orders, and maintaining appearances teaches a complex blend of skill, resilience, and social intelligence. Every day reinforces the intersection of labor, morality, and expectation, shaping how young women perceive their role in family, community, and society. By the end of adolescence, young women have internalized a delicate balance: work and morality, duty and personal desire, endurance and discretion. These lessons prepare them for adulthood, but also constrain it. Independence is conditional, freedom is negotiated, and personal identity is carefully managed within the visible structures of expectation. And yet, one question quietly persists as these lessons accumulate. If a woman's skill and endurance are always measured against both output and propriety, can her achievements ever belong fully to her, or are they always, in part, a reflection of what society expects her to be? As women move further into adolescence and early adulthood, the complexity of labor deepens. Daily life becomes a constant negotiation between multiple demands: household duties, paid work, social expectation, and the need for survival. Each task carries both practical and moral weight. A mismanaged meal or a poorly folded garment is not merely inefficient, it can signal moral laxity or incompetence, magnifying the pressure to perform flawlessly. In domestic service, responsibilities often expand as the household recognizes skill and reliability. Young women may supervise younger servants, manage kitchens, or coordinate laundry and clothing maintenance. Authority is limited but precise. They exercise oversight only as permitted by masters or mistresses, yet they are also accountable for failures. Navigating this hierarchical web requires tact, observation, and subtle negotiation. Industrial labor continues to demand endurance. In textile mills or garment workshops, long hours and repetitive tasks dominate life. Young women develop efficiency through repetition, often performing complex manual work with little instruction. Mistakes are penalized, sometimes publicly. Observation is constant. Supervisors measure speed, accuracy, and behavior. Skill alone is insufficient. Reliability and self-discipline are equally important. Education remains constrained. Literacy and numeracy are applied to practical tasks, such as reading instructions, calculating materials, or managing household accounts. Broader intellectual development is rare. Social lessons, however, abound. Observation teaches peer dynamics, negotiation, and strategy. Success depends not only on what you do, but how others perceive it. Reputation becomes a fragile but vital form of currency. Marriage prospects influence labor and behavior. Families often view employment as a means to secure a suitable match. Financial stability, skill, and moral conduct are evaluated by potential suitors and the wider community. Young women must navigate the dual expectation of contributing economically while preparing for domestic life. Every day reinforces a lesson in balancing visible labor with socially acceptable behavior. Physical demands remain relentless. Work is exhausting, meals are often insufficient, and living spaces are crowded. Health risks multiply. Fatigue, illness, and repetitive injuries shape bodies early. Young women learn to endure discomfort quietly, preserving stamina for work and social propriety. These adaptations are praised as virtue, but their cost is long-term. Friendship and mentorship serve as crucial support systems. Fellow servants or workshop colleagues offer guidance, companionship, and practical strategies. Learning how to manage the household, negotiate responsibilities, or avoid scrutiny often comes through informal apprenticeship within peer networks. Observational learning becomes as important as formal instruction. Economic necessity shapes decision-making profoundly. Choosing employment, managing wages, or deciding whether to remain in service is rarely free. Each option carries trade-offs: stability, reputation, and survival. Autonomy exists but is circumscribed by external pressures. Independence, when attained, is often precarious and conditional. Social surveillance is pervasive. Every interaction at work, in the street, in the home is noticed, judged, and remembered. Gossip, public reprimand, and peer comparison guide behavior. Young women internalize these lessons, learning subtle strategies of discretion, timing, and self-presentation. Public performance becomes inseparable from personal identity. Even the smallest routines, preparing meals, managing clothing, or arranging domestic spaces, carry lessons in efficiency, endurance, and foresight. Work and morality are entwined. A task done well signals skill and virtue. A task done poorly implies moral or social deficiency. Adolescence for women is as much about mastering these social codes as it is about performing physical labor. As these lessons accumulate, young women emerge from adolescence with resilience, skill, and social acumen. Yet the pressure to perform, the constant scrutiny, and the intertwining of labor with reputation leave lasting marks. Independence is possible but always negotiated, and freedom is tempered by expectation. And still, a quiet question persists. If every action, effort, and achievement is measured both in utility and morality, to what extent can a woman's labor, skill, or endurance be claimed as truly her own, separate from the demands and gaze of society? By early adulthood, the lessons of adolescence and early labor for women have solidified into practical skill, social awareness, and resilience. Domestic service, industrial employment, and household management have trained both body and mind. You have learned efficiency, discretion, and endurance. You have mastered observation, timing, and negotiation. Yet independence, when it arrives, remains a delicate balance against social expectation and economic necessity. For women who remain in domestic service, reputation is paramount. A favorable reference can secure a position in a better household or higher wages, while missteps may limit prospects. Success depends on the ability to anticipate needs, manage tasks discreetly, and endure supervision without complaint. Authority is limited, yet responsibility is real, especially when supervising younger servants or managing portions of the household. Performance in full view defines opportunity. Industrial employment presents a different set of outcomes. Skilled work in mills or workshops offers incremental wages and, occasionally, upward mobility within the trade. The discipline, precision, and endurance cultivated over years of repetitive labor make young women reliable employees. Yet health risks, fatigue, and the constant gaze of supervisors leave marks physical and psychological that endure long after formal training ends. Marriage and domestic life intersect with labor. Many young women continue to balance paid work with household management or caregiving. Expectations of morality, decorum, and domestic competence persist alongside financial responsibility. Success is measured not only in skill, but in the ability to navigate social norms, maintain reputation, and perform labor without visible error or complaint. Health and physical endurance remain critical. Years of long hours, repetitive work, limited nutrition, and crowded living spaces leave a lasting impact. Fatigue is familiar, minor injuries linger, and chronic conditions develop silently. The body, shaped by necessity, remains both asset and constraint. Resilience is praised, but its cost is often overlooked. Education continues to play a secondary role. Literacy, numeracy, and practical knowledge are tools for survival and efficiency. Broader intellectual development is limited, though informal learning through observation and peer networks provides strategies, guidance, and insight. Knowledge is valued when it enhances usefulness, discretion, or opportunity, rather than for its own sake. Social networks built during adolescence and early labor continue to be vital. Friends, mentors, and peers provide support, advice, and informal oversight. Navigating relationships, reputation, and alliances becomes a lifelong skill. The ability to manage perception is as important as skill itself. Success and opportunity depend on social intelligence as much as physical competence. Economic pressures persist. Even with wages, autonomy is constrained by obligations to family, household, or societal expectations. Choices are circumscribed by survival, reputation, and necessity. Independence is real but conditional, a carefully negotiated state rather than an absolute freedom. Decision-making must account for multiple overlapping responsibilities. By adulthood, a young woman's identity has been forged in the crucible of labor, observation, and expectation. Every action, whether cooking, sewing, cleaning, or performing skilled industrial work, carries weight. Physical skill, moral propriety, and social intelligence are inseparable. Achievements belong partially to self, partially to family, partially to employer, and partially to society. Yet, amid accomplishment and resilience, one question lingers. When life's labor and skill are always evaluated, observed, and morally measured, how much of achievement is truly personal? To what extent can a woman claim her own competence and endurance, separate from the gaze and expectations that shaped it? In reflecting on this, it becomes clear that Victorian women's work was never simply labor. It was a continuous negotiation of survival, skill, reputation, and morality. Success was real, but inseparable from the systems that demanded, watched, and judged it. And the lessons learned, resilience, discretion, endurance, would persist long after formal duties ended, shaping both personal identity and societal participation for years to come. Story 7. Hunger and Health, Nutrition, Disease, and Survival in Victorian Childhood. Hunger is more than an occasional discomfort in Victorian childhood. It is a constant, shaping every aspect of growth, behavior, and survival. For many children, especially in urban centers, daily life revolves around the acquisition and management of food. Meals are irregular, portions are small, and what is eaten is often monotonous and nutritionally insufficient. You learn early that food is both necessity and currency, and that scarcity defines experience. In crowded tenements, families struggle to feed themselves on minimal wages. Bread, potatoes, and occasional vegetables dominate diets, Meat is rare, a luxury for special occasions. Milk, fresh fruit, and eggs are often beyond reach. The monotonous diet provides calories but little nourishment. Growth is slow. Energy is uneven. Susceptibility to disease increases. Children adapt quickly. Smaller portions are consumed slowly. Older children learn to ration for younger siblings. Tricks of economy, stretching meals, reusing scraps, foraging become essential skills. Hunger teaches calculation, patience, and compromise. Those who fail to adapt face weakness, illness, and social stigma. Industrial cities like Manchester exacerbate nutritional challenges. Air is polluted, water is often unsafe, and crowded conditions spread disease. Children labor long hours, burning energy faster than diets can replenish it. Fatigue is constant. Malnutrition interacts with illness, weakening resistance to infections and slowing recovery. Survival is both physical and strategic. Disease is pervasive. Common ailments include typhoid, smallpox, cholera, tuberculosis, and scrofula. Infections spread rapidly in crowded housing and schools. Medical care is limited and expensive. Families rely on home remedies, folk knowledge, and charitable dispensaries. Children learn early to recognize symptoms, endure discomfort, and recover as best they can. Vulnerability is normal. Resilience is necessary. Public health infrastructure begins to emerge in the Victorian period, but progress is uneven. Sewer systems, clean water, and waste management are often absent in poorer districts. Outbreaks prompt temporary responses, but lasting change is slow. Mortality rates remain high, and the young learn early that life is fragile. Survival is as much a matter of circumstance as of effort. Nutrition interacts with social status. Middle-class children enjoy more reliable access to milk, meat, and fresh produce. Wealth buffers against disease and fatigue. Yet even in these households, knowledge of proper diet, sanitation, and exercise is imperfect. Food is socially coded. Adequacy reflects both morality and social position. Scarcity is normalized among the poor, abundance celebrated as virtue or propriety. Children internalize lessons from hunger and illness. Self-restraint, endurance, and vigilance become second nature. Sharing is necessary. Observation of siblings teaches empathy and strategy. Strategies for survival: stealing a morsel, scavenging, negotiating extra rations become skillful behaviors rather than moral failings. Hunger shapes ethics as much as physiology. Work amplifies these challenges. Factory labor, domestic service, and agricultural employment all require energy. Malnourished bodies perform less efficiently, increasing fatigue and risk. Employers note mistakes, absences, and slow work. Children learn to manage energy carefully, conserving effort where possible, working harder when necessary, and avoiding visibility when ill. Illness carries social and economic consequences. Absence from work or school may result in lost wages, punishment, or missed lessons. Contagion threatens family and community. Children internalize responsibility for health, not as personal choice but as survival strategy and moral obligation. Life is measured not in comfort but in endurance. Amid these hardships, small victories hold immense meaning. A meal that is sufficient, an illness survived. A sibling fed. These successes define competence. They are celebrated quietly and personally, often unremarked by adults or society. Daily survival becomes a skill as intricate and vital as literacy or numeracy. Yet, as children grow, a pressing question arises. If nourishment, health, and survival are contingent on circumstance, economy, and social structure, to what extent does resilience belong to the individual, and how much is imposed by necessity? In other words, can survival ever feel like triumph when it is dictated so relentlessly by hunger and disease? As childhood progresses, hunger and disease continue to define the rhythms of daily life, but the strategies for managing them become more sophisticated. By the time you reach early adolescence, you have internalized lessons about rationing, timing, and adaptation. You learn to anticipate scarcity, to stretch portions, and to prioritize who eats first. Survival is no longer instinct alone. It becomes deliberate, strategic, and at times morally complex. In urban slums, meals are often reduced to the barest essentials. Bread may be stale, porridge thin and watery. Potatoes, cabbage, or occasional root vegetables supplement the diet. Meat is rare, perhaps reserved for Sunday, special celebrations, or extraordinary effort. You quickly recognize that energy and strength depend not only on quantity, but on timing. Skipping a meal to ensure a younger sibling eats first is both practical and ethically reinforced. Labor continues to compete with nourishment. Factory children, domestic servants, and apprentices expend energy long before the day begins. Fatigue reduces appetite, yet work requires sustenance. You learn to eat quickly, to focus on high-calorie or filling foods, and to make meals last mentally longer than they last physically. Hunger is felt, acknowledged, and accommodated silently, an invisible companion to every action. Disease is an ever-present threat. Crowded living spaces, shared bedding, and contaminated water contribute to outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, and scarlet fever. Medical care is expensive, limited, or inconsistent. Families rely on home remedies, advice from neighbors, or charitable dispensaries when available. Children internalize both precaution and acceptance. Hand washing, avoidance of obvious contagion, and observation of early symptoms become essential survival skills. Public health reforms begin to appear, but slowly and unevenly. Clean water projects, sewage infrastructure, and vaccination campaigns gradually improve conditions, yet only a fraction of children benefit immediately. Poverty, crowded housing, and inconsistent enforcement mean that most urban children still face daily exposure to disease. Survival is as much a matter of environment as of personal endurance. Nutrition, disease, and labor intersect in ways that shape physical development. Malnutrition slows growth, weakens muscles, and increases susceptibility to fatigue. Chronic illness leaves lingering effects, stunted height, respiratory issues, or recurring infections. Yet bodies also adapt. Adolescents develop endurance, heightened pain tolerance, and remarkable capacity to continue working even when weakened. Resilience is built through repeated exposure, necessity, and observation. Social hierarchy mediates access to food and health. Wealthier households provide more consistent meals and better sanitary conditions. Poorer families rely on irregular charity, shared resources, and ingenuity. Even within these limitations, children learn subtle strategies, negotiating extra portions, earning treats through helpfulness, and discreetly preserving scraps. These strategies are as much a part of survival education as reading or arithmetic. Emotional consequences are intertwined with physical realities. Hunger and illness foster anxiety, vigilance, and responsibility. Adolescents learn to anticipate threats, both immediate and systemic. Decision-making becomes strategic, when to work harder, when to conserve energy, when to ask for help. Every choice carries consequence. The lessons of scarcity shape not only the body, but the mind. Schooling, when accessible, is affected by these pressures. Malnourished or ill children struggle to concentrate, memorize, and perform. Attendance is irregular, disrupted by illness, work obligations, or fatigue. Those who attend often learn under conditions of stress and distraction, highlighting a stark gap between ideal education and lived experience. Adaptation is as much about mental endurance as physical stamina. Yet amid scarcity and vulnerability, small triumphs hold profound significance. Successfully sharing food, surviving illness, or stretching a meal across multiple days provides a sense of agency. Adolescents internalize a subtle ethic. Skill, observation, and prudence can overcome some but never all external pressures. Competence is measured by survival, not indulgence. And through it all, a difficult question emerges. If survival depends on constant calculation, endurance, and adaptation, and if food, health, and circumstance are beyond control, can resilience ever be truly credited to the individual? Or is it merely the result of necessity imposed by hunger, labor, and disease less triumph than survival by default? By late adolescence, the lessons of hunger, labor, and disease have become ingrained. The body carries the memory of undernourishment, muscles adapted to endurance, digestive systems conditioned for irregular meals, immunity shaped by repeated exposure. Physical resilience is real, but it comes with lasting consequences: stunted growth, chronic fatigue, susceptibility to respiratory infections, and sometimes lifelong weakness from childhood illnesses. Strength and survival have been purchased at the cost of the body itself. Food, once scarce and uncertain, becomes both necessity and discipline. Adolescents know which foods sustain them, how to stretch portions, and how to ration for siblings or peers. Every meal carries significance beyond mere nutrition. It is a measure of skill, resourcefulness, and endurance. Those who master these strategies are praised quietly by families. Those who fail risk both health and social judgment. Labor interacts with survival in a relentless feedback loop. Factory work, apprenticeships, or domestic service consume energy, while scarcity and malnutrition amplify fatigue. A missed meal can mean mistakes. A missed day of rest can mean illness. Young people learn to pace themselves, prioritize tasks, and conserve strength where possible. Efficiency becomes both a moral and practical imperative. Disease continues to shape life. Epidemics flare unpredictably, disproportionately affecting children and adolescents. Families and communities adapt with strategies of avoidance, quarantine when feasible, and improvised remedies. Those who survive gain both experience and a cautious wisdom about risk, contagion, and resilience. Mortality and illness are not abstract, they are visible, immediate, and formative. Social and psychological lessons are equally profound. Scarcity teaches empathy, negotiation, and subtle strategy. Adolescents observe, imitate, and adapt, learning when to speak, when to wait, and when to claim resources. Reputation becomes tied not only to behavior but to endurance. Those who manage hunger and illness while maintaining composure earn respect and trust. Competence is measured by survival under pressure, not by formal achievement. Even modest public health improvements make noticeable differences. Access to clean water, better sanitation, and vaccination programs reduce the most immediate threats, though disparities remain stark. For some, these interventions mark a shift from purely reactive survival strategies to cautious optimism, even if resources remain limited. Life is incrementally less precarious, yet still dependent on skill, endurance, and observation. Education continues to be shaped by physical and social realities. Malnourished or frequently ill children struggle with sustained learning, reinforcing the sense that survival is the primary accomplishment. Knowledge is applied pragmatically, calculating rations, reading instructions, interpreting advice from elders. Learning is measured less by abstract understanding and more by capacity to manage life's constant demands. By the end of adolescence, children have acquired a quiet, hard-earned competence. Hunger and disease have taught calculation, restraint, empathy, endurance, and observation. Bodies and minds have been forged by repeated exposure to scarcity and illness, developing both resilience and vulnerability. Survival becomes a skill as intricate as literacy, numeracy, or vocational training, and just as essential. Yet as young people enter adulthood, one lingering question remains. If life has been shaped by necessity, hardship, and imposed limits, to what degree can survival be celebrated as personal triumph? When endurance is demanded, vigilance constant, and nourishment unreliable, is resilience a reflection of character or simply the inevitable outcome of living in a world structured by scarcity and disease? This tension between necessity and achievement marks the Victorian experience of childhood and adolescence. Survival is itself education. Resilience is both earned and imposed. Life, measured in rations, stamina, and avoidance of illness, becomes a preparation for adulthood in which labor, observation, and moral vigilance continue, echoing lessons learned in the most basic and essential aspects of life. food, health, and survival. Story 8. Public spaces, play, and peril childhood in the streets. For Victorian children, the streets are both playground and classroom, danger and opportunity intertwined. With crowded homes and long working hours for adults, public spaces become essential arenas for childhood exploration. Cobblestones, alleys, markets, and vacant lots serve as informal stages for social learning, physical play, and the development of independence, but they also expose children to hazards that shape the rhythms of daily life. In cities like Birmingham, children spill into streets the moment they are able. Boys cluster near markets, docks, or canal edges. Girls are often tethered to errands or accompanied by siblings, yet even these supervised excursions carry risk. Streets are alive with carts, horses, machinery, and adults in a hurry. Safety is contingent on vigilance, knowledge of the environment, and quick reflexes. Accidents are frequent, and the lessons learned early are brutally practical. Play is inventive but often risky. Games involve running, climbing, balancing on curbs or barrels, and chasing balls made from rags or scraps. Improvised toys are fashioned from discarded wood, cloth, or metal. Rules are fluid, enforced by peer consensus. Physical skill is prized. Speed, agility, and cleverness define success. Injury is common, yet resilience is learned through repeated exposure. The street becomes a testing ground for endurance, coordination, and self-confidence. Social hierarchies emerge naturally. Older children command respect, younger ones defer. Peer networks teach negotiation, cooperation, and conflict resolution. Disputes over space, toys, or playmates are resolved with negotiation, strategy, or force. Reputation is central. The quick, clever, or daring earn informal status, while the timid or clumsy risk marginalization. Lessons learned in these interactions translate directly into survival in work, domestic service, and family life. Economic necessity often intersects with street life. Children may deliver goods, run errands, sell small items, or beg. Earnings are modest yet crucial. Street knowledge, knowing which adults are generous, which areas are safe, and which shortcuts save time, becomes skill. Work and play overlap, teaching both practical literacy and social acuity. Independence is measured not by authority, but by the ability to negotiate risk successfully. Hazards are constant. Traffic, crowded markets, open drains, and construction pose physical threats. Disease lurks in every puddle, gutter, and neglected corner. Children develop informal risk assessments: which routes are safe, which areas avoided, which times of day minimize danger. Survival depends on observation, memory, and learned instinct. Casual misjudgment can lead to injury or worse. For girls, public life carries additional layers of surveillance. They are often expected to remain near the household or accompany errands, though the need for independence encourages small acts of negotiation. Peer networks teach subtle lessons: discretion, observation, and social strategy. Friendship and play occur in fleeting moments, often in shared corners or quiet streets, where misbehavior or exposure is less likely to draw adult attention. Education in the streets is incidental but constant. You observe transactions, arguments, and social cues. You learn about the economy, public etiquette, hierarchy, and negotiation. Street smarts become as valuable as book learning. Understanding risk, timing, and opportunity is essential, forming practical intelligence that supplements formal schooling. By adolescence, the streets have become a primary site of both learning and identity formation. Physical competence, social savvy, and moral awareness are all shaped in public. Children internalize lessons about vigilance, endurance, and discretion. Independence is earned through experience rather than granted by age. Every step, every game, every transaction reinforces skills that will be crucial for survival in work, household responsibilities, and adult society. And yet, even amid learning and camaraderie, a question persists. When the streets are both classroom and hazard, play and labor, exposure and freedom, how does a child ever feel truly safe or fully themselves within a world so simultaneously instructive and perilous? As children grow, The streets remain central to daily life, but the nature of interaction shifts. Adolescence introduces more responsibility, both social and economic, alongside greater awareness of danger. Streets are no longer only playgrounds, they are arenas of negotiation, observation, and survival. Learning to navigate these public spaces becomes essential preparation for adulthood. Boys often take on errands, apprenticeships, or street trades alongside their play. They deliver messages, sell small goods, or assist in workshops. In doing so, they learn timing, reliability, and strategy. Knowing which routes are fastest, which adults can be trusted, and which areas are unsafe transforms the street into both workplace and classroom. Mistakes carry immediate consequences: missed deliveries, lost earnings, or physical danger. For girls, errands and chores require negotiation within societal constraints. Travel beyond the home is monitored, yet necessity demands small measures of independence. Girls learn subtle strategies to manage both supervision and personal agency, using timing, observation, and discretion to complete tasks efficiently while avoiding exposure to moral censure. Social awareness is honed in these moments, as every step and interaction carries potential consequence. Play evolves into skill building. Games become less purely recreational and more reflective of survival skills. Balancing, climbing, running, and observation develop agility and reflexes. Peer hierarchies solidify. Leaders emerge, alliances form, and disputes are resolved with negotiation, intimidation, or demonstration of skill. Reputation continues to influence social standing, reflecting competence, bravery, and reliability. These lessons mirror the adult world. Ability, caution, and social intelligence govern outcomes. Economic necessity continues to shape behavior. Street trades selling newspapers, running errands, carrying messages offer small incomes that supplement family resources. Children learn timing, negotiation, and customer interaction. Every transaction reinforces the lesson that visibility carries consequence. Being observed performing well or poorly shapes reputation and opportunity. Work and play become intertwined, each reinforcing skill and discipline. Hazards remain omnipresent. Crowded streets, carts, horses, construction, and open drains pose constant risk. Disease spreads through water, mud, and proximity to others. Children develop informal safety practices, avoiding dangerous areas, timing movements to avoid conflict, and recognizing risky social encounters. Risk assessment becomes an unconscious skill, honed through repeated exposure. Mistakes are immediate teachers, often harsh but unforgettable. Social lessons deepen. Adolescents learn alliances, loyalty, and subtle forms of negotiation. They interpret peer behavior, anticipate gossip, and manage exposure. Observation becomes critical. Watching adults, peers, and authority figures informs decisions and strategy. Understanding public hierarchy: who controls space, who mediates disputes, who rewards or punishes, is vital for both survival and social success. Health and endurance are continuously tested. Long hours of activity, limited nutrition, and exposure to harsh conditions require stamina. Adolescents adapt, conserving energy, eating efficiently, and managing fatigue while remaining alert. Physical resilience is as crucial as mental acuity, and the combination determines success in both street and household life. Through these experiences, children gradually internalize the lessons of public life. Independence is not granted, it is earned through observation, skill, and careful negotiation of risk. Every game, errand, or interaction reinforces survival strategies and social intelligence. By the time adolescence concludes, you are competent in navigating danger, negotiation, and opportunity simultaneously. Yet, despite mastery of these skills, a persistent question remains. If independence is inseparable from exposure, and learning is inseparable from hazard, can a child ever truly claim safety or privacy? In a world where every step is observed and every action carries consequence, what does freedom look like for one so constantly in public view? By late adolescence, The lessons learned in public spaces have solidified into both practical skill and social intuition. Streets, alleys, markets, and empty lots have functioned as informal classrooms for navigation, negotiation, and endurance. Physical agility, vigilance, and social acumen are no longer optional, they are essential. Mastery of these skills determines not only social status among peers, but the ability to survive in urban life, work, and adulthood. Economic activity in the streets now carries real stakes. Adolescents engage in selling goods, running errands, or supporting family trade. These tasks teach timing, reliability, and strategic thinking. Reputation is fragile. Errors, tardiness, or dishonesty can have immediate consequences, from lost wages to social censure. Adolescents learn to calculate risk and reward, balancing assertiveness with discretion. Practical intelligence becomes as important as physical skill. Play continues, but it is increasingly entwined with social learning. Games teach strategy, observation, and teamwork. They reinforce hierarchy and develop leadership. Older children model behavior for younger ones, passing on lessons about negotiation, vigilance, and endurance. Risk assessment learned in play translates directly to labor, errands, and household responsibilities. Adolescents internalize the understanding that skill, timing, and prudence are inseparable from survival. Hazards remain unavoidable. Traffic, construction, disease, and crowded conditions continue to challenge adolescents. Physical resilience is constantly tested. Lessons from earlier childhood, judging distance, anticipating danger, recognizing unsafe spaces, are refined and codified into instinct. Failure can be costly, but repeated exposure teaches careful planning and adaptability. Survival is never guaranteed. It is earned daily. For girls, navigating public life remains constrained by social norms. Independence is exercised in subtle ways, managing errands efficiently, timing movements to avoid scrutiny, or negotiating small freedoms with authority figures. Social perception remains critical. Misjudged behavior can affect family reputation, employment prospects, and peer relationships. Observation, discretion, and negotiation continue to be key tools for autonomy. Health, nutrition, and fatigue remain central concerns. Long hours of activity, exposure to disease, and limited nourishment shape endurance. Adolescents develop stamina and subtle strategies to preserve energy. Recovery from illness or exhaustion is slower than in a better nourished environment, reinforcing the importance of self-monitoring and cautious risk-taking. Physical and mental resilience are inseparable. Social skills acquired on the streets, negotiation, alliance building, reputation management become lifelong assets. Adolescents who master these skills can navigate workplaces, households, and wider society more effectively. Those who fail may find themselves marginalized, punished, or limited in opportunity. Social intelligence becomes as critical as vocational skill in determining life outcomes. Reflecting on this stage of life, it becomes evident that the streets functioned as both training ground and trial. Adolescents learn not only physical and social skills, but also lessons about risk, consequence, and independence. Freedom is always measured against exposure, visibility, and responsibility. Independence is earned, rarely given. Every step in public is both practice and test. Yet even with mastery, one question persists. If every lesson is learned in public, if every action is observed and every error carries consequence, can independence or privacy ever be complete? When life itself functions as both classroom and hazard, what remains entirely your own, and what is shaped by the necessity of surviving in a world that watches constantly? Story 9. Education and Opportunity. Schooling in a Victorian World. For Victorian children, schooling is less a guaranteed right and more a conditional opportunity, often shaped by family wealth, location, and gender. In theory, schools provide instruction in reading, writing, arithmetic, and moral lessons. In practice, access is inconsistent, quality varies, and attendance is frequently interrupted by labor, illness, or domestic obligations. Education is a precious and sometimes fleeting arena of opportunity amid the pressures of survival. Urban centers like London offer a patchwork of institutions: charity schools for the poor, voluntary schools run by churches, private academies for the middle class, and occasional evening schools for working children. Each caters to different populations, reflecting both social hierarchy and economic necessity. Attendance is often determined by the immediate needs of family labor rather than the child's capacity or interest. Curriculum is practical and moralistic. Reading and writing focus on comprehension and transcription. Arithmetic emphasizes basic calculation, usually framed around trade, domestic management, or industry. Religious instruction dominates daily life, reinforcing moral codes, obedience, and societal hierarchy. Lessons are repetitive, drill-based, and designed less for exploration than for functional literacy and conformity. Discipline in schools is strict. Corporal punishment is routine. The cane, ruler, or strap is used to correct errors in writing, arithmetic, or behavior. Teachers maintain authority through constant observation, public correction, and an environment designed to instill compliance. Students learn quickly that mistakes are not private, and that perseverance under scrutiny is a fundamental expectation. For poorer children, school is intermittent. Work obligations, hunger, and illness often interrupt attendance. Those who are able to attend develop endurance, not only intellectual skill. Sitting through long, repetitive lessons while fatigued or underfed is itself a measure of resilience. The ability to absorb instruction amid discomfort becomes as important as the content being taught. Social lessons are intertwined with formal education. Children learn hierarchy, obedience, and the consequences of reputation. Friendships, alliances, and rivalries form within the classroom. Observation and mimicry are essential. Watching the responses of peers and teachers teaches social norms, expectations, and the subtleties of public behavior. Learning to perform correctly in front of others becomes a key skill, applicable both in school and in the world beyond. Girls' education is often narrower in scope, reflecting societal expectations of domestic roles. Instruction emphasizes reading, writing, basic arithmetic, sewing, and household management. Discipline and moral instruction remain central. For those who can attend, education is intended to prepare them for domestic service, marriage, or small-scale trade rather than professional or academic careers. The lessons of practicality, endurance, and discretion are reinforced daily. Despite these constraints, schooling represents opportunity. Literacy opens doors to communication, record-keeping, and eventual employment. Arithmetic enables trade, domestic management, and financial independence. Moral instruction and obedience provide social currency. For some children, education is the path to upward mobility, even if it requires endurance, patience, and adaptation to imperfect conditions. Hunger, labor, and disease intersect with schooling. Fatigue limits concentration, illness interrupts lessons, domestic obligations compete with attendance. Children must navigate these competing pressures, learning timing, prioritization, and endurance. Success is not simply academic, it is survival, self-management, and the ability to persist under constraint. Even in its mundane routines, copying texts, calculating sums, memorizing religious verses, schooling teaches essential skills for navigating Victorian life. Observation, endurance, discretion, and patience are as important as literacy. Every lesson, repetition, and correction reinforces the societal expectation that competence, obedience, and adaptability are paramount. Yet, as children sit at desks, copy passages, and solve sums, a question quietly emerges. If opportunity is filtered through labor, circumstance, and societal expectation, to what extent can education serve as genuine liberation? And when attendance is fragile and lessons are functional rather than exploratory, what is gained and what remains out of reach? As children progress through schooling, the structure and expectations intensify. Lessons remain rigid, rote memorization dominates, and practical utility overshadows curiosity. Yet, for those who attend regularly, schooling becomes a crucible in which endurance, discipline, and adaptability are tested as much as literacy or numeracy. Urban schools, particularly in industrial centers, are overcrowded. Classrooms hold dozens of students, sometimes in multiple age groups under a single teacher. Instruction is rapid and often impersonal. Teachers rely on repetition, strict rules, and public correction to maintain order. For a child, learning requires both mental focus and constant awareness of authority. Mistakes are rarely private. Embarrassment is part of the pedagogical strategy. Observation becomes a key tool. Watching peers to anticipate expectations or emulate correct behavior. Reading is taught primarily for practical purposes, comprehension of instructions, religious texts, or work-related materials. Writing is drilled through repetition of letters, words, and moral maxims. Arithmetic focuses on calculations applicable to trade, household management, or basic commerce. Education is functional. It equips children to navigate daily life, manage work, or perform domestic or industrial tasks with competence. Intellectual exploration is secondary. Discipline remains central. Corporal punishment is routine. Canes, rulers, or straps correct misbehavior or errors in lessons. The emphasis is on obedience and endurance as much as understanding. Children quickly learn to manage their responses, control emotion, and perform even when uncomfortable. The development of self-regulation is as significant as any academic skill. For working children, school often competes with labor obligations. Factory apprentices, domestic servants, and agricultural helpers attend only when work allows. Fatigue, hunger, and illness reduce concentration, making the learning process even more arduous. Persistence is required, as success depends not just on cognitive ability but on stamina, resilience, and strategic management of competing responsibilities. Girls and boys experience divergent curricula shaped by gendered expectations. Girls focus on literacy, numeracy, sewing, and household skills. Boys on arithmetic, reading, and vocational preparation. Despite this separation, both groups internalize the same lessons in discipline, observation, and obedience. Education functions as both skill acquisition and socialization into adult roles. The social dimension of schooling is profound. Peer hierarchies, alliances, and rivalries form naturally within classrooms. Observation teaches negotiation, mimicry, and strategy. Children learn who to impress, who to avoid, and how to navigate authority. Social intelligence becomes inseparable from academic skill. The ability to manage perception and reputation directly affects success and opportunity. Health and nutrition continue to shape educational outcomes. Malnourished or fatigued children struggle to concentrate, retain information, and endure long days. Illness interrupts attendance and slows progression. Schooling is thus inseparable from broader material conditions. Access, sustenance, and environment directly influence achievement. For many, education is an endurance test as much as an intellectual one. Opportunities created by education remain significant. Literacy and numeracy open pathways to apprenticeships, clerical work, or administrative roles. Moral instruction and social etiquette provide currency in both work and society. For some children, schooling allows incremental mobility, expanding choices beyond immediate survival. Yet these gains are fragile. Absence, illness, or family obligation can erase months of progress. In navigating these challenges, children internalize subtle lessons about resilience, timing, and strategy. They learn to allocate effort effectively, observe authority, and maintain composure under scrutiny. Academic skill becomes intertwined with life skill. School is simultaneously training, survival, and preparation for a wider world governed by expectation and obligation. And yet, the fundamental question lingers. If education is constrained, intermittent, and tightly bound to obedience, labor, and circumstance, how much does it truly expand opportunity? when lessons are measured in utility rather than curiosity, and success depends on endurance as much as understanding. What kind of freedom does schooling really confer? By the end of adolescence, schooling has left a lasting imprint on both intellect and character. Children who have endured years of repetitive lessons, strict discipline, and social observation emerge with a combination of practical skill, mental endurance, and social awareness. Reading, writing, and arithmetic, though often learned under harsh conditions, equip them to navigate work, household management, and the broader demands of society. Yet these gains are inseparable from the trials endured to acquire them. In urban and industrial settings, the transition from school to labor is seamless and inevitable. Apprenticeships, domestic service, or factory work require skills honed in classrooms: literacy for record-keeping, numeracy for transactions, punctuality, and social intelligence for navigating hierarchies. Education does not simply provide knowledge. It trains children to persist under scrutiny, to observe, adapt, and perform reliably, skills essential for survival in adult life. Gender shapes the outcome profoundly. Girls carry literacy and numeracy into domestic management, service, or small-scale trade. Skills such as sewing, accounting, and moral propriety form the foundation of household authority and employment opportunities. Boys, often prepared for trade, clerical roles, or industrial work, leverage arithmetic, observation, and social acuity to navigate hierarchical labor structures. In both cases, education extends beyond the classroom. It is preparation for socially sanctioned roles, intertwining intellect with expectation. Health, endurance, and resilience remain central. Long hours of attention in poorly ventilated classrooms, combined with malnutrition or fatigue, leave lasting physical and psychological effects. Yet adolescents adapt. Concentration, memorization, and self-discipline become ingrained habits. Learning to persist despite discomfort is as valuable as any academic lesson, shaping responses to labor, family obligations, and social hierarchy in adulthood. Social competence learned in schools persists. Navigating peer hierarchies, interpreting authority, and managing reputation provide essential tools for life outside the classroom. Friendships and rivalries teach negotiation, loyalty, and subtle strategy. Public performance, learned through observation and correction, equips adolescents for workplaces, households, and civic interaction. Education is not merely cognitive. It is a training ground for endurance, discretion, and practical intelligence. Opportunities afforded by schooling are tangible but constrained. Literacy and numeracy can improve employment prospects, increase wages, and enable small entrepreneurial endeavors. Moral and behavioral instruction provides social capital, facilitating acceptance and advancement within family, neighborhood, or workplace. Yet these opportunities remain conditional. Absence, fatigue, family obligations, or societal prejudice can restrict the gains of formal education. Success is contingent, fragile, and dependent on more than mere competence. Even mundane tasks, copying passages, performing sums, reciting moral lessons, instill enduring habits. Patience, perseverance, observation, and adaptability become second nature. Education's true legacy lies not solely in knowledge gained, but in the capacity to navigate a world of expectation, labor, and social hierarchy. Skill and endurance, intellect and social intelligence are inseparable. As adolescents transition to adulthood, a quiet tension persists. The classroom has equipped them to survive, work, and contribute, yet freedom and autonomy remain limited by circumstance, expectation, and necessity. Education has opened doors, but the structure of society dictates how far those doors can be traversed. Knowledge is power, but only within boundaries set by labor, morality, and social hierarchy. And so, one final reflection emerges. If education in the Victorian world is inseparable from discipline, endurance, and observation, can it ever be fully liberating? Or is it, ultimately, another mechanism by which society molds children into adults who meet expectation, survive hardship, and perform reliably? while the promise of true choice remains only partially realized. Story 10. Workhouses and Wages: Childhood in Institutional Care. For many Victorian children, survival depended on institutions rather than family, particularly the workhouse. Established under the Poor Law Amendment Act, workhouses were intended to provide relief for the destitute, but they were also punitive, regimented, and deeply hierarchical. Entry was stigmatized, conditions were harsh, and children quickly learned that endurance, compliance, and observation were essential skills for daily life. Life in the workhouse was strictly ordered. Children were assigned tasks according to age and ability, sweeping floors, tending gardens, washing laundry, or assisting in kitchens. Labor was both obligatory and omnipresent. Mistakes were punished, laziness suspected, and obedience enforced through routine and authority. Every action, from the smallest chore to mealtime behavior, was observed and assessed. Survival depended on mastering both the work itself and the subtle rules of hierarchy. Nutrition in workhouses was basic and repetitive. Meals typically consisted of bread, gruel, porridge, or occasional vegetables. Meat and dairy were rare. Portions were strictly controlled. Children learned to eat efficiently, stretch small rations, and ration for endurance. Hunger was a constant companion, teaching practical calculation, patience, and strategic consumption. Food was never merely nourishment, it was both a reward and a test. Discipline was unyielding. Corporal punishment, solitary confinement, and public reprimand were routine. Children learned quickly that compliance was not optional. Resistance, even in minor matters, could result in immediate consequences. Observation was critical. Understanding the moods of overseers, anticipating expectations, and predicting responses determined not just comfort, but survival. Education in workhouses was minimal but functional. Reading, writing, and arithmetic were taught to prepare children for labor outside the institution. Moral instruction reinforced obedience and humility. Knowledge was not intended for personal enrichment but for practical utility. The ability to follow instructions, manage tasks, and adapt to structured labor. Children learned that intellectual skill, like physical endurance, was measured by usefulness. Health and hygiene were constant concerns. Crowded dormitories, shared utensils, and limited sanitation made illness inevitable. Children learned early to recognize symptoms, manage minor ailments, and recover with minimal support. Medical attention was sparse and often delayed. Survival required vigilance, endurance, and the ability to continue labor despite discomfort or weakness. Vulnerability was normalized. Resilience was essential. Social dynamics within the workhouse were complex. Older children often supervised younger ones, creating informal hierarchies. Alliances and friendships provided support, yet competition for scarce resources, food, attention, and privileges was constant. Observation, negotiation, and subtle strategy became crucial tools. Children learned to navigate social networks carefully, balancing cooperation and self-preservation. Wages, when allowed, were modest and often symbolic. Paid employment was uncommon within the workhouse itself, but older children could take small jobs outside, remitting earnings to the institution or family. Even limited wages taught responsibility, calculation, and the relationship between effort and reward. Economic literacy was learned early, intertwined with discipline and social observation. Adolescents in workhouses emerge with skills both practical and psychological. Endurance, patience, discretion, and social intelligence are indispensable. Labor is inseparable from education and moral instruction. Every task, observation, and interaction reinforces the lessons of survival under constraint. Independence is conditional. Freedom is mediated by institution, authority, and circumstance. Yet, amid routine, structure, and observation, one question persists. When childhood itself is governed by labor, hierarchy, and survival imperatives, can a child ever claim a sense of agency? And if endurance and skill are imposed by necessity, what part of their competence is personal, and what part is demanded by the institution? As children age within the workhouse, the the demands of labor, obedience, and social navigation intensify. Adolescence brings increased responsibility. Older children supervise younger ones, manage more complex chores, and sometimes engage in work outside the institution. Survival is no longer simply about following orders, it becomes a test of endurance, observation, and subtle negotiation. Daily schedules are rigid. Dawn signals rising, washing, and chores. Breakfast is functional and brief. The day stretches with labor cleaning, cooking, laundry, tending gardens, or carrying supplies. Mistakes are noticed immediately. Punishment is swift. Adolescents learn to anticipate authority, predict responses, and manage their behavior accordingly. Compliance becomes both shield and strategy, an essential tool for survival. Nutrition remains limited and repetitive. Bread, porridge, and occasional vegetables provide caloric sustenance but little variation. Hunger is a constant companion, teaching rationing, patience, and practical judgment. Older children sometimes trade small privileges or favors for additional food, learning negotiation and subtle manipulation within tightly controlled circumstances. Food becomes not just fuel but a measure of resourcefulness. Education continues but remains pragmatic. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are applied skills rather than intellectual exploration. Older children assist with teaching younger ones, reinforcing knowledge while also strengthening responsibility and authority. Lessons in discipline, observation, and social conduct are intertwined with literacy and numeracy. Skill is valued only insofar as it improves efficiency, reputation, or survival prospects. Health and sanitation remain precarious. Dormitories are crowded, washing facilities minimal, and exposure to disease inevitable. Epidemics of scarlet fever, typhus, and smallpox periodically sweep through institutions. Children learn to endure illness, monitor symptoms, and continue labor when possible. Survival depends on both physical resilience and strategic discretion, avoiding high-risk tasks or conserving energy when vulnerable. Social life within the workhouse is complex and often tense. Alliances form for protection, access to limited resources, or social support. Rivalries emerge over authority, favor with staff, or attention. Older children navigate these networks carefully, learning negotiation, discretion, and influence. Peer hierarchy becomes an essential skill, teaching lessons about leadership, loyalty, and the consequences of misjudgment. Work outside the institution, when allowed, introduces new dimensions of responsibility. Adolescents may take apprenticeships, factory jobs, or small-scale labor to supplement the institution's resources or provide personal earnings. These experiences expand practical knowledge, punctuality, task completion, negotiation with authority outside the familiar environment, and handling small sums of money. Even minimal earnings teach the connection between effort, responsibility, and reward. Psychologically, adolescence in the workhouse cultivates resilience and adaptability. Repeated exposure to hardship, structured labor, and constant observation strengthens mental endurance. Children learn to suppress frustration, manage fear, and operate effectively under stress. These traits, though born of necessity, become tools for navigating life beyond institutional walls, shaping identity, skill, and approach to responsibility. Yet amid this structured endurance, a persistent question arises. When every skill, observation, and act of compliance is shaped by the institution, when freedom is limited and survival requires constant adaptation, to what extent can the competence acquired here be considered personal? And if resilience is forged in confinement and necessity, does it truly belong to the individual, or is it merely the product of circumstance? By late adolescence, children who have spent years within the workhouse emerge markedly shaped by the institution. Their bodies, minds, and social skills have been forged under constant observation, strict labor, and limited nourishment. Physical endurance, practical competence, and social acumen are well developed, yet these qualities are inseparable from the circumstances that demanded them. Survival and skill are intertwined, each inseparable from the other. Labor has become second nature. Daily tasks cleaning, cooking, laundry, gardening are executed efficiently, with an awareness of hierarchy and consequence. Older adolescents often supervise younger children, passing on lessons learned through years of experience. They have internalized discipline, observation, and endurance, using them to maintain order and navigate both authority and peer relationships. Competence is a combination of skill, prudence, and resilience honed under necessity. Nutrition and health remain defining influences. Many adolescents bear the physical consequences of long-term limited diets and exposure to disease, stunted growth, chronic fatigue, and susceptibility to illness. Yet they have adapted. They manage energy carefully, ration consumption, and endure discomfort with practiced composure. These adaptations are subtle forms of expertise, practical skills born from hardship rather than formal instruction. Education, though basic, provides essential tools. Literacy, numeracy, and practical instruction prepare adolescents for work outside the institution. The ability to read instructions, manage simple calculations, or maintain basic records facilitates employment and independence. Moral instruction reinforces compliance, decorum, and social observation, skills equally vital for navigating life beyond the workhouse walls. Social intelligence has developed in tandem with practical skill. Adolescents understand hierarchy, alliances, and the consequences of action or inaction. Negotiation, discretion, and observation are essential to maintain safety and access to resources. Friendships and rivalries, carefully managed, teach resilience, loyalty, and subtle leadership. Life in the workhouse becomes a microcosm of society, providing preparation for labor, domestic life, and community participation. Earnings, though modest, teach responsibility. For those permitted outside work, even minimal wages demonstrate the link between effort and reward. Managing money, understanding obligations, and negotiating labor tasks foster early economic literacy. Such skills, combined with endurance and practical knowledge, offer avenues of limited autonomy once adolescents leave institutional care. Yet as independence approaches, a critical question lingers. If skill, resilience, and social intelligence have been cultivated under strict oversight, labor, and necessity, what part of it is genuinely individual? How much belongs to the adolescent, and how much is the product of the institution's demands? Competence is real, yet inseparable from circumstance. The workhouse, intended as relief, functions as both crucible and constraint. Adolescents leave with endurance, skill, and social insight, yet also bear the lasting imprint of regimentation, hunger, and disease. Survival is hard-won, and lessons are etched deeply into character, shaping future behavior, relationships, and understanding of the world. Life outside the workhouse will require application of these skills, but freedom remains a negotiation, a balance between ability and circumstance. Ultimately, the story of childhood in institutional care is one of endurance, adaptation, and quiet competence. Adolescents acquire survival, labor, and social skills that are extraordinary in their precision and reliability, but these are inseparable from the system that demanded them. Their resilience is both personal and imposed, a product of circumstance as much as individual capability. And in this tension, one sees the enduring question of Victorian childhood. When life is structured by necessity, where does true agency reside?